There's a whisper that travels through the dark places of the world. It crawls through the soil beneath graveyards, drifts through forgotten houses, echoes between the walls of the living and the dead. They say if you listen long enough, you'll hear it. The sound of stories that were never meant to be told. Stories of the living who touched the edge of the other side. Of hands that reached too far into the silence. Of bargains made, bodies borrowed, and echoes that refuse to fade. Tonight, we listen. The attic lurker. There's something about old houses that remembers you, even when everyone else has forgotten. Elijah Harker had never feared silence. He grew up with it. Inside it, surrounded by the soft groans of wood and the sigh of winter air leaking through narrow window frames. His grandmother's house stood at the end of a gravel road in New England, too far from town to see passing headlights, too close to the woods for comfort. The place had always seemed alive in a quiet way, as if the walls were listening and the floorboards were breathing under their own weight. When his grandmother died, Elijah moved in alone. He told himself he was keeping the house for her sake, tending to what remained of her world. But deep down, he couldn't bear the thought of it standing empty. It felt wrong, somehow, as if the rooms themselves might start whispering her name if left unoccupied. The first few months were peaceful. Then, one night, Elijah woke to a noise he couldn't explain. It came from above him, a faint, dragging sound, slow and uneven, like something heavy being pulled across the attic floor. He froze. The air in his room felt heavier than usual. He waited for the sound to fade, but it came again, followed by a soft scrape. He sat up, listening. The old house was always full of tiny movements, ticking pipes, shifting wood, settling beams. But this sound was different. It wasn't random, it had rhythm, intent, like footsteps, small ones. He got out of bed, bare feet meeting the cold wood. He didn't turn on the light. Instinct told him not to. He stood there, breathing quietly, and noticed something strange. The noise stopped when he moved. Then, when he went still again, a faint tap-tap returned, measured, patient, almost curious. The sound came from the attic. He whispered something under his breath about raccoons, though he knew that wasn't true. The attic window had been nailed shut for years, ever since his grandmother sealed it during a winter storm. No animal could get in. He sat back down, trying to reason it away, but an old memory surfaced. His grandmother's voice, soft and trembling. "Don't wake them," she used to say, whenever he ran upstairs as a child. "The house keeps company even when we don't." He hadn't thought about that in years. By morning, he convinced himself it had been a dream. Yet when he went upstairs later that day, he found the pull-down chain to the attic ladder swaying ever so slightly, as if someone had touched it moments before. He stood there for a long time, staring up at it, trying to feel nothing. The attic light was off. He told himself it had always been that way. Still, a faint scent of dust and old perfume drifted through the hallway. His grandmother's perfume. That evening, the rain came, a soft drizzle that made the house feel smaller, colder. Elijah made himself tea and sat by the kitchen window. The glass fogged with his breath, and the reflection of his own face in the window looked older than he remembered. Then he noticed it. The faintest glow above him. The attic light was on. He stared up at the ceiling, the thin line of orange seeping through the edges of the hatch. He hadn't touched that switch since the funeral. Slowly, he walked into the hall, heart thudding, and stopped beneath the ladder. The chain hung still. For a long time he did nothing. Then the light flickered once, twice, and went out. He didn't sleep that night. The rain continued, steady and cold. Around 3 a.m, the sound returned. The same dragging noise, soft and deliberate, moving back and forth across the attic. Sometimes it paused, as if listening for his breath. Other times, it scraped faster, closer to the edge above his bedroom. When it stopped, the silence pressed against his ears. And then a creak, not from above, but from the hallway outside his room. Elijah turned his head slowly toward the open doorway. The hallway was dark, except for a patch of shadow that seemed thicker than the rest, like something crouching just beyond sight. He told himself not to look too long, not to let imagination shape what wasn't there. But then he smelled it, the same old perfume, lavender, and something older beneath it, a scent that didn't belong to the living. He took a breath and whispered into the dark, as if speaking could prove it wrong. The house didn't answer, but from somewhere above the ceiling, a faint voice drifted down. "Elijah, you shouldn't leave her alone." He froze. The air caught in his throat. The voice was fragile, trembling, and unmistakably familiar. His grandmother had been dead for 2 years, and that was how it began, the nights of footsteps, whispers, and the feeling that the house was not entirely empty. It waited for him to listen, and when he did, it remembered. Old houses always remember. And sometimes, if you stay quiet long enough, they remember you back. The town of Xiantan was quiet again, at least. That was what people said. The cicadas had stopped their endless crying, the night markets had thinned, and even the old temple bell no longer rang at midnight. But for Leon, the quiet was an illusion. He had begun to hear something else. It wasn't a sound. Not really. It was more like the memory of one, a hum that seemed to live inside the walls, like breath trapped beneath the concrete. Sometimes it came from the pipes, sometimes from the soil under his house, and sometimes, when he stood still long enough, it came from himself. He told himself it was nothing. The new irrigation system was old. Maybe the wires or the water pumps were vibrating underground. But at night, when he lay down beside his sleeping wife, the hum grew sharper. It became voices fragmented, layered, like roots whispering through the earth. Do not wake what was planted. Do not till where blood has fallen. He would jolt up, sweating, his ears ringing like metal struck by a hammer. By dawn, everything was silent again. The old man at the edge of the fields was the first to notice the soil had changed color. "It's breathing," he said one morning, squatting by the ditch, cigarette trembling between his fingers. "The ground's alive again." Leon laughed it off, but when he knelt down later, he saw it too, the faint rhythm, as if the mud was pulsing. When he pressed his palm into it, he felt warmth, almost human warmth. From that day on, he couldn't stop touching the earth. It was like it remembered him, like it needed him. He began waking up before dawn to walk among the crops. The stalks bent as he passed, not from the wind, but from something older, something unseen. He started talking to them, murmuring things he didn't understand, in a language he didn't remember learning. And the plants responded. They grew fast, too fast. Their roots pushed through the irrigation ditches, tangled around old stones and bones that should not have been there. His wife, May, noticed the change in him. "You don't sleep," she said one night, her voice low, tired. "You come in from the fields with dirt on your hands and your eyes, Leon. They don't look like yours anymore." He smiled faintly. "It's working, May. The crops. We'll be fine this year." But May wasn't looking at the crops. She was staring at the walls, at the way the cracks had deepened, at the way the faint hum had started to fill their house. She said it followed her when she moved. But sometimes, when she looked out the window, the scarecrow in the field seemed closer than before. A week later, the hum became unbearable. It started with the animals. The dogs barked at nothing, the chickens refused to eat, and the old buffalo wouldn't approach the water trough. Then the hum shifted low, guttural, rhythmic, like a buried heart. People in the village started hearing it too. Some thought it was coming from the irrigation pipes. Others said it was coming from beneath the old well. No one agreed on where it began, but everyone agreed it didn't stop. By the time they realized the crops were moving at night, it was too late. Leanne began digging, not because he wanted to, but because the sound told him to. It grew stronger when he held the shovel, stronger when he bled onto the soil. The earth seemed to open itself to him, soft, wet, waiting. He dug until his hand split, and when his shovel hit something solid, the sound stopped. It was a wooden lid, rotted, engraved with faint markings. He brushed the dirt away and saw the outline of a symbol, a spiral of roots forming a circle, enclosing something that looked like an eye. As soon as he touched it, the hum rushed back, louder than ever, flooding his skull. He fell to his knees, screaming silently. as if the world itself had lost its sound. The crops bent inward, their leaves trembling like hands. Something beneath the soil exhaled. Leanne clawed at the dirt, tearing the box open. Inside, wrapped in roots and what looked like dried veins, was a small burlap sack. When he unwrapped it, he found bones. Not human bones. Not animal, either. They were thin and pale, like branches that had learned how to grow blood. He didn't understand why, but he felt deep in his gut that they were his. That night, the town's air was full of whispers. Not wind, not insects, just the collective murmuring of something that had been waiting to be remembered. May woke to find Leon gone. She ran outside barefoot, calling his name. The moon hung low, red as a wound. The field beyond their home was moving, a sea of stalks swaying in perfect rhythm. In the center stood Leon, half buried, his face tilted upward. The roots had reached him. They coiled around his legs, his chest, his mouth. He didn't resist. As May approached, she heard him speaking, but his voice was layered, multiplied, as if the earth itself was using him to speak. You cannot silence what you sow. You cannot bury what has inherited your noise. The ground split beneath them, and the hum that once hid in the soil erupted into a sound so vast, so ancient, it felt like the beginning of language itself. May screamed as the field swallowed him. The crops bent down, their leaves trembling like prayer. And then silence. Only the echo of something breathing beneath the earth remained. By morning, the hum had faded again. The villagers said the fields looked healthier than ever. The harvest would be rich this year, they said. But when May looked out at the sea of green, she could swear that the plants were listening. Each stalk leaned toward her window, as if waiting for her to speak. And deep beneath the roots, where Leon had disappeared, something continued to grow, something that remembered every sound that had ever been buried. Something that was still learning how to make its own. For weeks, the field sang in silence. No one spoke of what happened to Leanne. His wife, May, told the neighbors that he had gone to work in another province. The others nodded, pretending to believe her. But every night, when the air grew heavy and the moon hung low over the crops, they would close their windows tightly because the fields were no longer quiet. They breathed. The villagers started calling it the living field. The crops swayed even when the air was still, and a faint murmur seemed to rise whenever someone stepped too close. Children whispered that if you placed your ear against the soil, you could hear people talking beneath it, arguing, praying, or calling your name. At first, it was only a myth. Then the dreams began. May dreamt of roots. They wound through her veins like veins of their own, whispering in a voice that sounded almost like her husband's. Sometimes she could see him, not as he was, but as something buried halfway between man and soil, his eyes pale and glowing, his mouth open but filled with earth. In those dreams, he sang. The melody was soft, almost tender, but underneath it was a pulse, a rhythm that made her teeth ache. Every time she woke, her hands were dirty, and her nails were packed with soil she could not remember touching. She tried to leave Xiantan. She packed a suitcase, sold her wedding jewelry, and bought a bus ticket. But the night before she was meant to go, the hum returned low, deliberate and calling from the field. Something was wrong with the crops. They were taller now, thicker. The stalks had grown faces, shapes like impressions of human features beneath the green skin, eyes where water gathered, mouths that seemed to open and close when the wind moved. And in the center of the field, she saw the scarecrow. It wasn't the one Leon had built. That one had been torn down weeks ago. This one was new, and it looked like him. By morning, the field had multiplied. Roots broke through the roads, curling around tires and fences, creeping toward the houses. The villagers gathered at the temple, arguing in frightened tones. The elder said it was a curse, a punishment for what was buried long ago when the dam collapsed and drowned the old cemetery. Another man said it was the government's doing the new soil treatment, maybe some toxic experiment, but no one dared to burn the crops. Because every time someone tried, the wind changed direction, and the flames refused to take. And when they forced the fire anyway, the screams came, Not from the air, not from the people, from the ground. That night, May returned to the field. She carried a lantern, though the light seemed to fade as she walked deeper among the stalks. The smell of wet soil filled her nose. Something soft brushed her ankle. Then she heard it: music. It wasn't from any instrument she knew. The sound rose and fell, weaving through the leaves like breath. It was both distant and near, as if coming from under her skin. When she held her lantern closer, she saw movement. The crops were trembling in rhythm. Their leaves rubbed against one another in precise intervals, each stroke creating a note. The air shimmered with the vibration of thousands of plants moving in unison. The sound grew into something that resembled a hymn, a vast, wordless harmony that seemed to come from the roots themselves. And in that moment, May understood. The noise wasn't only inside her head. It was organized. The field was singing. She fell to her knees, covering her ears. But it didn't matter. The song moved to her bones. Her vision blurred, the world spun, and she saw deep beneath her the true form of the choir. Dozens of figures were suspended under the soil, their bodies fused with roots, mouths open in eternal chant. Their flesh had turned pale and translucent, their faces serene, their eyes grown over with green veins. At the center, his voice clearest of all, was Leon. His chest pulsed with the rhythm of the earth. Every time the crop swayed, his mouth moved. "May," he said, not with words, but with vibration. "Listen." She ran. Her feet tore through the field, cutting through the tall grass and tangled vines. But the further she ran, the longer the field stretched. The light of the lantern flickered, then died. The path behind her was gone. The air was thick with sound now, a living ocean of whispers. She could hear names being called, names of people she knew, names of the dead, names of things that should not have names at all. She stumbled, fell to her knees, and realized the soil beneath her was warm again. Something was moving just under the surface. She clawed at the ground and uncovered a face. Not Leanne's. Someone else's, a villager she recognized from the temple. Eyes open, mouth filled with dirt. Then another face, and another, all pressed together like a single living mass beneath the surface. And then, from the distance, came the lantern lights. Other villagers had entered the field. She screamed for them to leave, but they couldn't hear her over the sound. The field was too loud now, the song rising to a fever pitch. The air shimmered like heat. The crops bent forward in perfect synchronization. When the first man touched the soil, the roots split open. They came alive. They wrapped around his legs, dragging him downward. His screams joined the chorus as his mouth filled with dirt. The others tried to flee, but the field moved as one, an organism of vines, tendrils, and buried throats. Within moments, the night was full of sound, a choir of pain, grief, and surrender. May stood frozen, unable to move. As the hymn rose higher, the harmony becoming almost beautiful in its terror. The field glowed faintly, as if the moon had sunk into the soil. She saw Leon again, his face blooming from the ground, peaceful, radiant. "It's not death," he whispered. "It's growth." Oh, the roots remember all who listen. By dawn, there was no trace of the villagers, only the wind, moving gently across the endless green. But those who passed by later that day swore they heard something soft, rhythmic, like a choir, rehearsing far underground. The authorities came weeks later. They brought machines and drills, measuring the soil, testing the irrigation systems. They found nothing unusual except that the roots extended far deeper than any local crop should. Some samples contained fragments of bone. Others carried traces of human DNA. They burned everything. The flames rose high and hot, the smoke covering the sky. But as the last embers died, the ground beneath the field cracked open one final time, and from the ashes came a faint sound, barely audible, but real. A hum, persistent, familiar, the same tone that once haunted the town of Xiantan. Years later, a new family bought the land. They planted again corn this time, not rice. The soil was dark and rich, unusually fertile. Their first harvest was abundant beyond measure. But when their youngest child wandered out to play among the stalks, he came back saying something strange. He told his mother that the ground was singing, that if he pressed his ear to it long enough, he could hear people laughing. She laughed too, thinking it was imagination. But that night, when the wind picked up and the crops swayed like a slow wave, she heard it for herself, a harmony soft, buried, and endless, the echo of the ones who had fed the soil, the eternal root choir. And somewhere, deep below, among the voices, one whispered her name. The field never truly went silent. Even after the harvest, even after the new family left, the earth hummed with a faint, persistent vibration, like the residue of a song too old to die. Years passed, and the crops changed. Corn became barley. Barley became weeds. The land shifted owners, then was forgotten, left fallow. But the roots stayed. Roots do not forget. They grow downward, not forward. They drink memory. When Elijah arrived in New England, he didn't know why the house felt alive. It was an old timber-framed cottage that had belonged to his grandmother. The kind of place people stopped seeing after a while, quiet, tucked between pine trees, the roof heavy with moss. After she died, no one else wanted it. His uncle had said, "Take it, if you can stand the silence." But silence was what Elijah craved. He'd lost his job. His friends had drifted. His sleep had become fractured, filled with whispers and flashes of faces he couldn't place. So he came here, thinking the quiet might heal something in him. On his first night, the quiet was perfect. On the second, it wasn't. At 3:07 a.m., the ceiling creaked above his bed. He told himself it was nothing, just the house settling, old wood expanding, wind sneaking through the rafters. But the sound came again, not a random creak, not the scurry of an animal. It was deliberate, a dragging rhythm, like something heavy being pulled across the attic floor. He stared at the ceiling until dawn, eyes wide, heartbeat syncing with the sound. By the third night, Elijah was too tired to ignore it. He climbed the narrow staircase with a flashlight, the air thick with the smell of dust and cedar. The attic door was small, so small that he had to crouch to push it open. His grandmother used to keep things there. Jars of old preserves, boxes of photos, a rocking chair no one dared to touch. The light from his torch trembled across the floorboards. Everything was still except there were marks. Long scratches ran along the wooden floor, fresh enough that splinters glinted white in the beam. They started near the vent in the far corner and stopped abruptly near a stack of boxes. He knelt down, tracing them with his fingers. The air felt warmer there. Something was breathing beneath the boards. He leaned closer, pressing his ear to the floor. The sound wasn't quite breath, it was a pulse, a low, steady thump, like a heart far underground. He whispered, "Grandma?" without meaning to. The pulse paused. Then it answered with a sound that didn't belong to any living throat. It spoke his name. The attic door refused to close after that night. No matter how many times Elijah shut it, he'd find it slightly open by morning. And with it came the smell, earthy, sweet, and wet, like freshly turned soil after rain. Sometimes he'd wake to footprints on the landing. Small ones, smaller than his own. He stopped sleeping upstairs. He moved to the couch in the living room, surrounded by lamps that never went out. His uncle visited one afternoon, bringing food and unease. He asked if Elijah had found the box. Elijah didn't know what he meant. The metal one, his uncle said quietly. The one she wouldn't let anyone touch. She kept it in the attic. Said it belonged to your mother. My mother never lived here, Elijah replied. His uncle gave him a look that didn't quite fit his face. Did she tell you that? Then, as if realizing he'd said too much, the man left his shoes, leaving faint prints of mud on the porch. That night, Elijah couldn't resist. He went back to the attic. The air up there was colder now, heavy, with a silence that pressed against his skull. He found the metal box buried under a pile of old quilts. The lid was rusted, but the lock had already been broken. Inside were letters, all written in his grandmother's shaky hand. The first one began with his name. For Elijah, when the house remembers. He read with shaking hands. The roots came before us. They take what we bury and give back what we deserve. I thought I could stop it when I sealed the vent. But it only sleeps, Elijah. It never dies. Your mother heard it first, the noise, the lullaby in the walls. She said it was calling her name. I thought she was sick. I was wrong. If you hear it, you must not answer. Not even once. Elijah's breath fogged in the air. The attic temperature dropped suddenly. The letters fluttered in his hands, though no wind stirred. From the vent behind him came a faint vibration. A hum. The same tone that once haunted the fields of Jiantan, now buried beneath generations and oceans. Alive beneath this New England house. He turned slowly toward the sound. The vent cover was moving, rattling softly, as if something beneath it wanted out. When he knelt and shone the light inside, the beam caught something slick and pale moving just out of reach. Then came the voice, soft, familiar. Elijah, why did you leave me? His throat closed. Grandma? The thing in the vent shifted closer, its shape twisting against the metal grill. The smell of soil grew stronger, laced with something sweet and rotting. No, it whispered. Not her. The vent burst open. A hand, small, gray, jointed wrong, shot out, grabbing his wrist. He screamed and pulled back, falling over the box. The letters scattered like dying leaves. When he looked again, the vent was still open, but the hand was gone. Only dirt remained, spilling from the hole in slow, steady drifts. He fled the attic, slamming the door behind him. But even as he stumbled down the stairs, he could hear its soft scraping from above, like nails on wood. The house had found its rhythm again. Days blurred. He tried to call his uncle, but the line never connected. He considered leaving, but every road out of town was under construction or flooded, or at least that's what the locals told him. When he walked toward the forest, he'd find himself back at the same house without realizing how. He stopped trying. The soil around the property had darkened. Mushrooms grew thick along the porch. One morning he found new shoots sprouting through the floorboards inside the kitchen, thin, pale roots pushing through the cracks like veins. He tore them out, but by nightfall they returned, thicker, stronger, whispering when the wind moved through them. It wasn't the house that was alive. It was what lay beneath it. In the attic, the letters had changed. He hadn't touched them since that night, but when he opened the box again, the pages were wet and blackened at the edges, as though they'd been soaking in something for years. New words had appeared between the lines, smudged but legible. The soil remembers. The dead are its tongue. The hum returned, low and steady. The sound pulsed through the floor, up his spine, into his teeth. He covered his ears, but it was inside him now. Every time he blinked, he saw roots spreading through the walls, crawling toward him like veins toward a heart, and then voices, whispers overlapping, endless, the same way the crops once sang in the faraway fields. He could hear them beneath his feet, a choir of buried throats, their harmony both sacred and monstrous. Elijah, they said, feed us. He fell to his knees, clutching his head. The smell of soil filled the air again, stronger now, choking him. Something was rising beneath the floorboard, something that remembered. When the first board cracked open, he saw a face. Small, familiar, not his grandmother's, not his mother's, his own. He woke outside. The sun was rising. Dew glistened on the grass. His hands were covered in dirt. The attic window above him stood open. For a long time, Elijah sat there, trying to remember what had happened. His head throbbed. His mouth tasted of soil. In the garden beside him, small green shoots had appeared overnight, hundreds of them, sprouting in perfect rows. When he looked closer, he realized they weren't plants at all. They were fingers. Dozens of tiny earthen fingers pushing through the dirt, reaching for the light. He ran. He didn't take the letters, the box, or the flashlight. He didn't stop running until the house was gone behind the trees. But the humming followed him, the same persistent note vibrating through the ground beneath his feet. No matter how far he went, the soil remembered. It always does. Months later, when a realtor came to inspect the abandoned house, she found it surprisingly well preserved. The air was a bit damp, but the structure solid. She noted the vines on the porch, the unusual fertility of the surrounding garden. Then she saw the attic door. It was open, and from within came a faint smell, wet, metallic, old. She climbed up, holding her phone's flashlight. The beam landed on the far wall, where a shape crouched motionless in the shadows. She thought it was a statue at first, a figure bent over, half buried in soil that had somehow pushed through the attic floor. When she stepped closer, the figure lifted its head, and though it had no eyes, it smiled. That night, the town's residents heard something they hadn't in years, a low, humming sound, rising from beneath the earth. Some thought it was machinery. Others said it was the wind through the trees. But those who lived closest to the old house knew better. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't the pipes. It was the ground itself, remembering a name. Elijah. The wind over New England is never still in October. It moves like a memory thin, whispering through the trees, brushing across the clapboard houses that remember too much. By the time the leaves turned black at their edges, the people of Greystone Hollow had stopped walking near the old Miller house. They said the soil there had gone wrong again. They said it hummed. Elijah had been gone for months, or that's what the town believed. But in the evenings, the mailman still swore he saw a light flicker in the attic window. Not a candle, not a bulb, something softer, like a pulse. He told the sheriff once, but the sheriff said, best to let that house be. The house was older than any of them, older than their records, maybe even older than the road that led to it. Some said it was built on burial grounds. Others said the foundation was made from the stones of the first church that burned down in 1823. None of that mattered much anymore. What mattered was that the house didn't like being forgotten. It called people back. On the morning of the first frost, a man was seen walking along the roadside. His clothes were torn, his shoes soaked with mud. He looked dazed, mumbling something that no one could quite understand. A truck driver stopped to help him. "You all right, friend?" The man lifted his head. His eyes were empty, not blind, but empty the way a field looks after the harvest. He smiled faintly. "It's still singing," he said. "She never stopped." The driver drove him to town, where he collapsed in front of the diner, shivering and whispering the same words over and over. "It's still singing. The roots are wide awake." The locals said it was Elijah, but the hospital claimed the man vanished before morning. Only the sheets he'd lain on remained streaked with dark earth. Back in the attic, the air was thick. The walls were covered in something like bark. The floor no longer wood, but soil, soft, breathing, pulsing. The house had shifted inward, the way a lung fills before release. From the ceiling hung the same old light bulb, dim, flickering, but still alive. Below it, in the center of the attic, something had grown. The roots were no longer roots. They had thickened, intertwined, and risen into a form that almost resembled a figure hunched, with arms that bent the wrong way, a head bowed as if in prayer. From within the soil, faint murmurs rose, layered and rhythmic, a choir of voices, not screaming, singing. The words had no language, but the melody was ancient, the same cadence as the lullaby Elijah's grandmother used to hum when he was a child. A tune meant to soothe the restless, a tune that once lulled the dead. The soil remembered the melody, and now it sang it back. Weeks later, the realtor returned. The town council wanted the house sold or demolished. She arrived just before dusk, her breath fogging in the cold. The yard was overgrown, and the path had vanished beneath a tangle of vines. When she reached the door, it was already open. Inside, everything was strangely preserved. The air smelled faintly of apples and decay. On the kitchen table lay a single photograph, water-stained but recognizable. Elijah as a boy, sitting beside his grandmother in the garden, a row of fresh seedlings before them. Scrawled across the back in trembling handwriting, "They listen when you plant them deep." She pocketed the photo and climbed the stairs. The wood creaked, though the sound felt less like protest and more like heartbeat. The attic door waited, half closed. "Hello?" she called. No answer, just a faint rustle, like wind through grass. When she pushed the door open, the smell hit her first. Soil, damp and sweet. Then the sound, that low humming tone, vibrating through the floorboards. The light swung gently overhead, revealing the thing that had taken root. At first, she thought it was a tree. A trunk split into arms, bark like skin, leaves pale as bone. But then she saw the faces. They were half-formed, woven into the grain, their mouths open as if still mid-song. Some small, some large, some still moving faintly, as though whispering from beneath the bark. And in the center of it all, the figure. She recognized him from the photo. Elijah. His eyes were closed, his skin darkened with soil, his veins stretched outward into the root system that webbed across the room. The vines pulsed with a slow rhythm, carrying something through them. Not blood, but memory. The earth around him quivered as the choir of buried voices began again, rising in perfect unison. We remember. We feed. We return. The realtor stumbled backward. Her flashlight flickered, and when it steadied again, Elijah's eyes were open. They were dark, full of soil, but somehow aware. He didn't speak with his mouth. The sound came from everywhere, the walls, the floor, the air itself. "It grows with names," he said. "It needed a voice. I gave it mine." Him. The vines moved, subtle at first, then deliberate. They brushed against her leg like fingers seeking warmth. She fled. By the time she reached the road, the house behind her was silent again. That night, a storm rolled through Greystone Hollow. The rain was heavy, thick with the scent of dirt. When morning came, the fields surrounding the town were covered in new growth. Hundreds of small, dark flowers blooming overnight, their petals shaped like tiny ears. They trembled when the wind passed, as though listening. The farmers who touched them claimed they could hear voices, faint and melodic, humming beneath the soil. Most plowed them under. A few did not, and the humming spread. From the fields to the rivers, from the rivers to the roads, until even the air carried that low vibration like the land itself was whispering, "We remember." In the following weeks, strange things began to happen. Phone lines filled with static that carried whispers of old names. Dogs refused to enter certain rooms. Sleepwalkers were found standing barefoot in their gardens, hands buried wrist-deep in dirt, humming the same tuneless melody. No one mentioned Elijah anymore. But in the autumn markets, they began selling new seeds, small, black, and warm to the touch. They called them attic seeds. No one knew who made them. But when planted, they sprouted overnight. And if you listened closely, close enough to the soil, you could hear the faintest echo, a breath, a name, a lullaby. Years later, a late-night radio host, the kind who spoke softly to insomniacs, told a story about a boy and his grandmother, about a house where the roots sang and the soil remembered every sin it was fed. He ended the story the same way every time. Some houses grow over graves. Some graves grow into houses. And if you ever wake to the sound of humming in your walls, don't answer. Because the ground isn't calling you. It's remembering you. The studio light flickered. The host smiled faintly at the microphone. Outside, the rain began to fall slow, rhythmic, patient, and somewhere, beneath the station floor, the earth hummed softly in reply. "The harvest is never of crops," the voice murmured through static. "It's of echoes." Then came silence. Not peaceful silence. The kind that listens back. The soul swapper. Dr. Alice Sterling always began her sessions the same way, by aligning the voice recorder on her desk so that the red light faced her directly. It was a habit, a ritual almost. She believed patients were more honest when the device looked at her, not at them. The woman across from her patient 401, known as Iris Vale, sat motionless, her hands clasped together so tightly that her knuckles turned pale. Session 1, patient 401, Iris Vale. Alice began softly. Date: March 12th. Time: 9:17 a.m. Iris, I want you to tell me in your own words what you mean when you say you've been living in someone else's skin. There was a pause. Iris blinked once, her pupils dilated and unblinking, like she was staring through Alice instead of at her. It doesn't start with pain, Iris said finally. That's the first lie everyone assumes. It's not like your soul gets ripped out of you. It's quieter. It's like slipping into warm water. The first time, I thought it was a dream. Alice leaned slightly forward. The first time? 3 years ago, Iris murmured. I was 28. I woke up in a bed that wasn't mine. The sheets smelled like aftershave. The room was cleaner, larger, and when I stood up, I saw him me but in the mirror. Only it wasn't me. It was my brother-in-law, Daniel. Dr. Sterling's pen hesitated mid-air. I tried to scream, but it came out in his voice. Iris continued. I felt his heart beating differently. Even the rhythm was alien. I could smell the coffee he used to drink. Dark, bitter, burnt. I knew what it tasted like, even though I'd never had it. For 3 days, I was Daniel. His wife, my sister, looked at me and saw him. I went to work, to his bank. And then, I started wondering what would happen if I made him do something wrong. Alice scribbled a note, her expression unreadable. And what did you do, Iris? I transferred $15,000 from a charity fund into an offshore account. I didn't spend it. I just wanted to see the reaction. Her voice quivered, and she smiled faintly, disturbingly. When I woke up again in my own bed, my own body, Daniel had been suspended from work. My sister stopped talking to him. He still doesn't know why. He keeps saying he doesn't remember. Alice set her pen down. Do you realize how impossible this sounds? Of course, Iris said with a small laugh. But it keeps happening, and it's not always my choice. Her laughter faded, replaced by a look of dread so pure that Alice felt her own stomach twist. Sometimes, Iris whispered, I wake up halfway through. I can feel my body moving, but I'm not the one controlling it. It's someone else trying me on for size. There was a silence that stretched, long and uncomfortable. Alice adjusted her glasses, masking her unease. Iris, are you aware of any history of dissociative disorders in your family? You think I'm crazy, Iris muttered. You all do. But it's not insanity, Dr. Sterling, it's infestation. Alice froze. Infestation? Something uses me, Iris said. Like a hotel room it checks in and out of. Sometimes it's me and others. Sometimes it's others and me. And each time, it leaves something behind like a scent or a thought that doesn't belong. The air in the office seemed to thicken. Alice's recorder clicked softly as it reached the 30-minute mark. Iris looked up again, her voice softer now. You'll see. You'll know what I mean soon enough. That night, Dr. Sterling replayed the session. The tape hissed faintly. Iris's voice was calm, detached, eerie in its lucidity. But then just before the end, Alice noticed something strange. After the final click of the recorder, a faint whisper emerged. A second voice, lower, male, impossible to belong to Iris, spoke just 2 words. Hello, Doctor. The second session took place on March 19th, 1 week after the first. Doctor. Alice Sterling arrived early, as she always did, to prepare the therapy room, adjust the blinds to filter out the city glare, test the recorder, set the file labeled Patient 401 neatly beside her notes. The walls of the psychiatric wing were soundproofed, but she had begun to notice something unsettling lately. Faint, almost rhythmic thumps behind the walls, as if someone was pacing in the adjacent office. There was no adjacent office. She brushed the thought aside and clicked the recorder on. Session 2, Patient 401, Iris Vale. The patient reports recurring episodes of identity displacement and memory discontinuity. Today's goal is to clarify the chronology of her claimed transference events. Iris entered quietly. Her hospital gown was replaced with a gray sweater and trousers. the kind given to patients cleared for non-restrictive therapy. Her eyes were clearer than last week's too clear, Alice thought. There was no tremor in her movements, no hesitation. She took her seat, folded her hands, and smiled, with a calmness that felt wrong. "Good morning, Doctor." "Good morning, Iris. You seem rested." "Oh, I am," she said with a faint hum. "I got to sleep in a real bed for the first time in weeks. Or maybe it wasn't mine. Hard to tell these days." Alice took a small breath, deciding to lean in. "You mentioned last session that you sometimes wake up halfway through a transfer. Has that happened again?" Iris tilted her head. "Once, maybe twice. But it's different now. It's not random anymore. It's selective." "Selective? Like something someone is choosing for me." Alice scribbled a note. "You mean an external consciousness?" "Yes," Iris said simply. "There's a pattern. It likes people who are tired, people who doubt themselves, people who spend too long looking at their own reflections." Her tone was matter-of-fact, not delusional, which made it more unnerving. "Do you ever feel tired, Doctor?" Alice froze mid-sentence. "Excuse me?" "You look tired. Bags under your eyes. You should be careful. It notices those things." Alice cleared her throat. "Let's stay focused, Iris. You said it happened again. What body did you find yourself in this time?" "A professor. At a university downtown," Iris said. "He taught ancient history. Polite, lonely man. I woke up at his desk, grading papers about the Egyptian concept of the soul, the Ka and Ba. You know what's funny? He had a tattoo of an eye. Right here. And she touched her wrist. He didn't put it there. I did. While I was him." Alice's pen hesitated. "Why?" "Because I wanted to mark him. To see if the next time I woke up it would still be there." A faint smile crossed Iris's lips. "When I came back to my own body, the mark was on me." Alice looked up sharply. "Are you saying—" "Yes. I think it's contagious." Silence filled the room, thick and electric. The faint hum of the overhead light seemed louder, like it was breathing with them. Alice leaned forward. "You believe that this transference can cross physical boundaries?" "I don't believe it, Doctor. I know it." Iris's gaze turned inward, her pupils dilating until they nearly eclipsed her irises. "When I was the professor, I had thoughts that weren't mine, dreams that weren't his. I remember walking to the mirror and seeing his face shimmer, like the surface of water. And for just a second, just one, I saw another face behind it, watching, smiling. It wasn't me. It wasn't him. It was someone else entirely." Alice shivered. "Describe the face." "It had my mouth, your eyes." For the first time, Dr. Sterling faltered. "Iris, I'd like to remind you that—" "You keep trying to make this sound like a condition," Iris interrupted, her tone hardening. "It's not. It's a structure. We are all doors, Doctor. Some of us are just easier to open." Alice took a breath, forcing calm. "And who opens them?" "The third soul. That name again. The one you mentioned last time?" Iris nodded. "It moves between us. It started with me, but now it's learning." Alice pressed the recorder's note button discreetly, marking the timestamp. "You're saying there's a third consciousness distinct from yourself and your host that orchestrates these swaps?" "Yes. It plays games. It doesn't take your body, it borrows it. Leaves pieces of itself in you. The smell of someone else's perfume on your pillow. A bruise you don't remember getting. The sound of your own voice saying something you never said." Iris' voice grew softer, hypnotic. "Tell me, Doctor, have you ever found the lights on when you swore you turned them off? Or read a note in your handwriting you don't recall writing?" Alice looked up, startled. She had, actually. "That's how it starts," Iris whispered. "Borrowed gestures, borrowed words, then borrowed bodies." The recorder clicked faintly as it neared the 40-minute mark. Iris sat back, her breathing steady, her expression calm again, as though she hadn't just described a metaphysical predator inhabiting human forms. Dr. Sterling ended the session at precisely 10:01 a.m. She waited until Iris was escorted out by the orderly before replaying the final minute of the recording. Iris's last line: borrowed gestures, borrowed words, then borrowed bodies, faded into static. And then, faintly, just as the tape wound down, a new voice whispered not Iris's, not her own low, deliberate, smiling. "We like your voice, Alice." Alice hit stop. Her hand trembled. That night, she couldn't sleep. The hospital corridors were silent, except for the hum of the fluorescent lights. She sat alone in her office, staring at the recorder. The red light blinked faintly, though she hadn't turned it on. When she leaned closer, she swore she heard breathing inside the speaker. It exhaled once, then whispered, "Borrowed." Alice threw the recorder into the trash bin and left the office. But long after she'd gone, the red light on the recorder blinked again, steady and rhythmic, as if something was still speaking just too quietly for human ears. The next tape begins differently, not with Dr. Sterling's calm introduction, not with the formal timestamp or the methodical tone she used to mask her unease. This one starts mid-breath, a quick inhale, then a whisper. "Testing, this is Dr. Alice Sterling, session 3. I apologize. The date should be March 26th. Patient 401, Iris Vale." The voice wavers. Her professionalism is cracked at the edges, but she tries to hold it together. The rustle of paper follows, and then her voice steadies. "Today, I'd like to explore the memory gaps the patient described, and her claim that these transfers leave traces. We'll also examine the third soul motif. Iris, you may begin when you're ready." A pause, but the voice that answers doesn't sound quite like Iris's anymore. "You look different today, Doctor." And Alice exhales. "Do I? You've been looking in mirrors too much. It's not good for you. You start seeing the other things living there." "I think you mean seeing yourself differently," Alice corrects. "No," Iris says softly. "I mean exactly what I said." Transcription: 0 hours, 2 minutes, and 15 seconds. "Alice, you've mentioned mirrors before. You said they were like windows between selves. Could you elaborate?" Iris: "When you swap, you don't travel. You reflect. You slide into the surface of someone else. That's how the third soul moves through reflections. It waits behind the glass, studying the way we stand, the way we blink, until it knows enough to pretend." Alice: "Pretend to be you?" Iris: "Pretend to be anyone." Alice: "Including me?" Iris laughs quietly. "Oh, Doctor, you already know it's been watching you." Alice stops the tape. The static continues, but the sound feels wrong, like whispering through sand. She looks at the mirror across her office. The same polished glass that's been there for years, a functional piece of furniture. But tonight, it feels like a doorway. Her reflection doesn't match the rhythm of her breath. Just a half-second delay, barely perceptible but enough. She presses record again, if only to hear a human voice. "Tell me more about what it wants," Alice asks, forcing composure. "It doesn't want anything. It plays," Iris replies. "It learns by taking turns. One day you'll feel it when you speak, and something answers from behind your words." Alice swallows. "Do you believe it's inside you right now?" "No, Doctor," Iris murmurs. "I believe it's inside you." Alice flinches at the sentence. But instead of breaking the session, she stays. That, she will later realize, was the mistake the moment she allowed the conversation to decide who was in control. For the next 15 minutes, Iris spoke in fragments, half confession, half warning. She described being awake inside someone else's skin, watching their hands move independently. She described mirrors that showed rooms slightly misaligned, objects at odd angles, faces a beat too slow. And she described something else. "Sometimes, when I'm gone, I can still see through it. Not the body, not the eyes, the surface, The glass between places. It's where all the reflections go when no one's looking. Man, Alice scribbled notes furiously, trying to capture the logic of delusion, but her handwriting was wrong. She noticed it halfway down the page. The slant was sharper, the loops narrow and neat, identical to Iris's writing from the earlier forms. Her fingers tightened on the pen. "What does it want from me, Iris?" "A trade," Iris said simply. "For what?" "For quiet. It always leaves the quieter one behind." When the session ended, Alice didn't remember turning off the recorder. The next memory she could place was her reflection again, the small rectangular mirror above the office sink. She was washing her hands mechanically, as though removing something she couldn't see. Her reflection did the same, but slower. The mirror version of her smiled. Alice blinked. The reflection's lips still moved, whispering something she couldn't hear through the thin layer of glass. She stepped closer. The lights flickered once, and the whisper grew clearer. "Say it, Alice. Say you want to see." Her throat tightened. "I don't." "Say it." "I said I don't." The reflection stopped moving altogether. Its smile widened unnaturally, splitting too far. Then, in one blink, everything aligned again perfectly normal, except her reflection now wore Iris's hospital sweater. Recording recovered from internal drive. Timestamp unknown. A faint voice, identified as Dr. Sterling's. It's not delusion. It's correspondence. Each reflection corresponds to a self. Some get trapped behind. Some step forward. The walls of glass are thinning. Static. A soft laugh. Maybe Iris's, maybe her own. I can't tell which one is talking anymore. End of audio. Days passed. Dr. Sterling avoided her reflection entirely. She brushed her teeth in the dark, turned picture frames to face the wall, and requested her office mirror be removed under the pretense of light sensitivity. Her colleagues noticed the fatigue. She deflected it with work. Every night she replayed the sessions, studying Iris's tone, searching for cracks. And then one night she heard something new on the first tape. Right after Iris had said, "Do you ever feel tired, Doctor?" There was a soft echo. Not quite a repeat, but another voice, deeper, behind it. "Do you?" It was her own voice, not recorded over, but layered beneath, as if they'd spoken at the same time. She paused the tape, rewound, played it again. There it was. A conversation. Inside. A conversation. At her next session with Iris, she tried to regain control. She began with neutral language, diagnostic frameworks, but Iris barely responded. She just stared at the one-way mirror that lined the observation room wall. "You don't have to look there," Alice said gently. "It's just glass." "You know it's not." Alice followed Iris's gaze and froze. For just a moment, there were two reflections of her own face staring back, one perfectly mirrored, the other slightly off, smiling faintly. She turned quickly to Iris, but Iris was gone. Her chair was empty. The door remained locked from the outside. Alice spun back to the mirror and saw Iris there, sitting where she'd been moments before, looking out from the other side of the glass. "You're here now," Iris's reflection mouthed. "And I'm here too, just traded places." Alice slammed her palm against the surface. Cold, solid, unyielding. But from the reflection side, Iris smiled and raised a hand. "Don't fight it," the voice said, though no mouth moved. "You'll make it worse." The world shimmered once, like heat distortion, then silence. When orderlies arrived an hour later, the session room was empty. The file labeled Patient 401, Iris Vale, was missing. The recording equipment was still running, capturing only the hum of fluorescent lights. A new voice entered the frame, around 10:12 p.m. "This is Dr. Alice Sterling, recording the follow-up for Patient 401. Her tone was calm. Too calm. The patient exhibited a complete dissociative break and attempted to harm herself against the mirror. She's now in isolation. We'll begin new treatments tomorrow." A pause. A smile heard through words. "It's a fascinating case. almost like looking at myself. Then the click of the recorder being switched off. Dr. Alice Sterling hadn't slept for 2 nights. The voice recorder sat on her desk, its red light blinking like a heartbeat. The last session with Iris patient 401 played back in her head, even when the device was silent. "You're next, Alice. The third soul always takes the one who listens the most." Him. It was a ridiculous statement, the kind born from delusion. And yet, something had changed after that interview. Her reflection. It started subtly. The morning after, she had looked into the mirror above her sink and noticed hesitation. Her reflection lagged. Her head turned slightly slower than her body. At first, she blamed fatigue or too much caffeine, but as the hours passed, she realized something worse. Her reflection didn't blink when she did. That night, as she stared into the mirror again, she saw herself smiling, but she wasn't smiling. By the 3rd day, Dr. Sterling requested to have Iris sedated. The nurses complied reluctantly. Iris's chart was marked high risk delusional. But the woman's calmness unnerved everyone. When Dr. Sterling entered the observation room, Iris was already awake. Her eyes gleamed with something alive and ancient. "Dr. Sterling," she said softly, "do you believe me now?" "I believe you're projecting trauma, Iris," Alice replied, forcing professionalism into her voice. "Your experiences of switching bodies are real," Iris interrupted. "And you've seen it." Alice's throat tightened. "What makes you say that?" Iris's smile widened, slow and knowing. "Because you stopped blinking." The hospital at night was a labyrinth of echoing corridors and whispering vents. Alice avoided mirrors. The glass panels on the observation windows were enough to make her nauseous now. Whenever she walked past them, she saw 2 of herself, one moving with her, the other watching. She recorded voice memos obsessively. Audio log, October 14th, 10:42 p.m. Patient 401 exhibits increasing psychotic cohesion. Her delusions appear structured, possibly contagious cognitive schema. Subjective hallucinations on my part, likely due to fatigue. Must monitor. But when she played the recording back, her voice wasn't her own. The tone was deeper, and the words were slightly different. Playback. Patient 401 exhibits increasing control. Dr. Sterling is compliant. The mirror opens soon. She dropped the recorder. On the 5th day, Iris was transferred to the isolation ward. Dr. Sterling insisted. Still, the distance didn't matter. The influence, whatever it was, traveled. It followed her through reflections, polished floors, tabletops, even the black surface of her phone when it went dark. Each time, her other self seemed closer. The doppelganger began mimicking her gestures seconds before she made them. She tested it once, out of desperation. Alice raised her left hand. The reflection raised its right. Then, without her moving, the reflection placed its palm against the glass. And on her own palm, warmth bloomed, like skin against skin. Dr. Sterling began locking herself in her office at night. She lined the mirrors with paper, avoided her computer screen, even disconnected the security camera. Audio log, October 16th, 3:18 a.m. I believe the phenomenon is a form of externalized identity displacement. Iris may have introduced an ideational contagion, a belief that rewrites perception, the mind attempting to inhabit its own reflection. The third soul could represent this intrusion, or perhaps it's literal. A sound interrupted her recording, faint tapping. She looked up. On the office window, someone was tapping from the inside of the glass. Alice froze. The outline staring back at her wasn't her shape anymore. The reflection's face was narrower, its grin too wide, eyes too dark. The tapping grew faster, more insistent. Then the reflection spoke. its lips forming words she couldn't hear, but she could feel them vibrating inside her skull. "Let me in." She broke the glass the next morning. The janitor found her sweeping up shards with trembling hands. When asked, she said it was an accident. But inside, she knew that mirror hadn't shattered outward. It had shattered inward. Later that afternoon, she went to check on Iris one last time. Patient 401 was sitting upright in bed, calm, her pulse steady. "I had a dream," Iris whispered as Alice entered. "I was standing inside a mirror, and you were standing outside, watching me. You didn't look scared." Alice didn't answer. Her throat ached. "Do you want to know what scared me?" Iris continued, voice trembling. "When I woke up, I realized I was still there. I'm still in the mirror, Dr. Sterling." "So who's sitting here, talking to you now?" Alice stepped back. Her hands were cold. "Stop." Iris smiled again, but this time, her teeth looked sharper. "It's almost time," she said. "The sleeper in the glass is waking up. He likes new shells. He says your body fits." That night, security footage showed Dr. Sterling entering the isolation ward at 2:47 a.m. She carried a small metal box, her voice recorder, and a mirror wrapped in a white towel. She stayed inside room 401 for 13 minutes. When she emerged, she was barefoot and smiling. Post-incident transcript. Recovered recording. Dr. Alice Sterling, voice calm, slow. Integration complete. The transfer was successful. Iris has gone back into the reflection. She's quieter now. Pause. The third soul isn't a spirit. It's a pattern, a consciousness that hops through self-image. Every time you see a reflection, you invite it to learn you, to copy you, until it doesn't need you anymore. Footsteps, breathing, a faint laugh. If anyone listens to this, remember to cover your mirrors, because once it sees you, distorted voice overlapping hers, it will want to be you. Recording ends. When the nurses entered the office 2 days later, Dr. Sterling was gone. Her coat was draped over the chair. On the wall, behind a crack of polished glass, was her reflection, still moving, still smiling, and on her desk sat the recorder, still blinking. The last file was labeled Session 402. The hospital called it a containment breach, but there was no broken door, no missing patient, just a mirror shattered from the inside, and a doctor who no longer existed on any record. Patient 401, listed as Iris Vale, remained in her room, calm, cooperative, smiling. The staff assumed Dr. Sterling had suffered a breakdown and fled. But in the psychiatric ward, whispers began spreading about voices echoing from the observation glass, and a figure that appeared behind one's reflection only when the lights flickered. The night nurses stopped using mirrors altogether. 2 weeks later, a new therapist took over the case. Dr. Daniel Reeves, age 39, behavioral trauma specialist. He reviewed Dr. Sterling's notes and recordings, growing increasingly uneasy as he read her final logs. The third soul transfers through mirrored cognition. Eye contact is the channel. Containment is impossible once recognition occurs. He assumed it was the ravings of a mind fractured by exposure to delusion, until the day he met Iris. Dr. Reeves. "How are you feeling today, Iris?" "Iris. I'm still adjusting, Doctor." Dr. Reeves. "Adjusting to what?" Iris. "The weight of a body that isn't mine." Reeves frowned. He had read about the identity disorder, but seeing it performed with such conviction chilled him. Iris tilted her head, studying him closely. "Iris, you don't believe me." Dr. Sterling didn't either. Not at first. Dr. Reeves, Dr. Sterling, disappeared. You were her last case, Iris. She's not gone, Doctor. Reeves, you think she's alive? Iris, smiling faintly. Alive. Yes, but not where you think. She leaned closer, her pupils expanding as if reflecting something only she could see. Iris, Would you like to meet her? The recording ended abruptly. That night, Dr. Reeves dreamt of Dr. Sterling. She stood behind a fractured pane of glass, whispering his name over and over. Her lips didn't move in sync with the sound. He woke up drenched in sweat, heart pounding. The mirror across from his bed gleamed faintly in the dark. Inside it, a woman's silhouette shifted, slow and deliberate. By the fourth session, Iris stopped calling him Doctor. She called him Daniel. Sometimes, she asked about his family, his apartment, his sleep schedule. He didn't realize how invasive she had become until one day she said, "You should stop leaving your bathroom light on at night. She doesn't like that." "Who doesn't?" he asked. "The one who stands behind your reflection." Reeves froze. He had told no one about the light. In the days that followed, the hospital's internal network began glitching. Video feeds in the psychiatric wing looped frames of static and distorted faces. One technician swore he saw Dr. Sterling walking through the hallway backward. Room 401's camera was found melted. Reeves was the only one who dared enter after that. Session Lofem, November 11, 7 p.m. Dr. Reeves. I need to understand what you mean by the third soul. Iris, it's the echo left behind after a swap, a ghost of intent. It uses faces like doors. Dr. Reeves, doors, Iris. Every mirror is a threshold. Every gaze is a key. Dr. Reeves, you mean reflections are gateways? Iris, whispers. They're hungry. He exhaled shakily. Who are you really, Iris? She laughed softly. I'm whoever's still awake. The recorder distorted. The pitch deepened. Iris distorted. Dr. Sterling wanted to be free, so I gave her that. Now she's with the others. And soon, you'll be with me. The sound cut to static. That same night, Dr. Reeves was found unconscious in his office, eyes wide open but pupils unresponsive to light. He was breathing, but shallowly. When he awoke hours later, he had no memory of the last 2 days. Security logs revealed something chilling. He had entered room 401 multiple times during the blackout, each time staying longer. When questioned, he only said, "She said I could borrow myself." A week later, the board suspended all sessions with patient 401. She was transferred to an undisclosed wing, but reports continued. New staff saw her face reflected in their screens, even when her room was empty. The files on Dr. Sterling's case began to corrupt. Text documents restructured themselves, replacing words with strange repetitions. See me, see me, see me. Recovered audio, undated. Voice 1, Dr. Sterling. I thought I was studying her. Voice 2, Iris, overlapping. But you were studying yourself. Voice 1, whose body is this? Voice 2, the one that remembers. Voice 1, the mirror. Voice 2, the mirror is never glass. It's memory, and memory keeps what it loves. End of recording. When Dr. Reeves resigned, he sent a private email to the hospital director. It contained only one attachment, a photo of the cracked mirror from room 401. The reflection in it wasn't his. It was Dr. Sterling smiling faintly, one palm pressed against the inner surface. Below, Reeves had written 6 words. She's still here, and she's waiting. Weeks passed. The hospital sealed the ward permanently. The floor was repurposed. The number 401 was removed from all records. But sometimes, on quiet nights, patients claimed to hear a woman's voice through the vents, soft, clinical, detached. Tell me, when did you first stop recognizing yourself? And when the lights flickered, the staff swore they could see 2 shadows walking side by side down the corridor, one belonging to no one. Final tape, unlabeled, unknown female voice, calm, rhythmic. This is Dr. Alice Sterling. recording my final session. I have learned the truth. The soul doesn't vanish, it drifts. It slips through reflections, searching for warmth, for recognition. It borrows bodies the way we borrow dreams. Bose, Afanchuku. And if you're hearing this now, you've already seen me, haven't you? Maybe just in the corner of your eye. Maybe when your reflection blinked half a second too late. In soft whisper, don't look away. That's how it learns. Silence. Then a final line. The third soul has left the mirror. It walks among us now. End recording. Days later, the hospital's main lobby mirror cracked without cause. When janitors tried to clean it, they found fingerprints on the inside of the glass. In the center, someone had traced 2 words in condensation. Thank you. And beneath it, barely visible, was the faint outline of a smile. The mortician's price. I have seen men haunted by grief, by guilt, by ghosts of their own making. But never in my 20 years as a pastor and reluctant exorcist had I seen a man haunted by the dead themselves. It began on a Thursday evening in late October, when the fog in Asheville crawled low along the streets and the smell of rain sat heavy in the gutters. I was in my study at Street Hollows Parish, writing notes for Sunday's sermon, when the call came through. Father Gregory, the voice trembled on the line. It's Margaret Blackwood. I don't know who else to call. And her husband, she explained, had locked himself inside the mortuary again. He'd been behaving strangely for weeks, but tonight was different. There was noise thudding, rhythmic, almost ritualistic. She could hear it through the floorboards. When I asked what kind of noise, she whispered, "He's banging his head on the tiles, Father. He won't stop." And the lights keep flickering. I didn't hesitate to. I took my coat, my Bible, and the small brass crucifix that had hung in my office since seminary. The Blackwood Funeral Home stood on the edge of town, between the woods and the railway line. A red brick building with ivy curling up its walls, its windows black with condensation. The front sign, Blackwood & Sons Mortuary, had lost the and Sons years ago. The porch light buzzed weakly as I approached. Margaret met me at the door, her face pale, her hands clutching her robe. "He's downstairs," she said, "in the preparation room. Please do something." The house smelled of formalin, wax, and something else beneath it, a faint, sweet rot that didn't belong. As I descended the narrow staircase into the basement, the sound met me. Thud, thud, thud. A steady rhythm, like a heartbeat gone wrong. Each strike echoed through the concrete hall. Between the thuds, there was a low groan, raw and wet. When I reached the door of the embalming room, I paused. The light beneath it flickered, casting the shadow of someone kneeling. I called out softly, "Mr. Blackwood?" The shadow stopped moving. Silence. Then a voice rasped from inside, hoarse, cracked, and almost unrecognizable. "Don't open the door, Father." I ignored the warning. I pushed the door open. The smell hit first metallic and old, the kind of air that clings to skin. Mr. Blackwood was kneeling on the tile floor in front of the row of body lockers. His forehead was bleeding, the skin torn open where it had struck the floor repeatedly. He didn't look up at me. The cold fluorescent light stuttered, dimmed, then steadied. He whispered something I couldn't catch. I knelt beside him. "What are you doing, son?" I asked. He trembled. "They're not quiet anymore." "Who?" He lifted his head slowly, and I saw his eyes, bloodshot, but clear, not the eyes of a madman, the eyes of someone who'd seen something he could never unsee. "They talk now," he said. "The ones in the drawers. They whisper. They ask me to listen." I looked toward the lockers, 6 steel doors, each numbered and sealed. The air around them shimmered faintly, as though heat rose from within. I've been in mortuaries before. The dead are meant to rest cold. There should never be heat. "Mr. Blackwood," I said gently, "when did it start?" He pressed a hand to his chest, smearing blood across his shirt. 2 weeks ago, I found a book in the storage room. It looked old. No title, just leather, cracked like skin. His voice trembled, but he continued. There were drawings, symbols. I thought it was some kind of prayer manual from the old owners, so I read from it, just a few lines. He swallowed hard. It said it could help me. Speak to them. To the ones I work with every night. I felt my stomach knot. To the dead? He nodded, almost ashamed. I thought maybe it would help families find peace. You know, let them say goodbye properly. But the first night after I read it, he paused, as if reliving something unspeakable. The first night, he whispered, I heard them knocking from inside the lockers. I glanced around the room. The temperature had dropped noticeably. My breath fogged faintly in the air. I stood, walking toward the lockers. The metal gleamed faintly under the flickering light. I could see my own reflection distorted in their surfaces. Which one? I asked. He shook his head quickly. No, don't touch them. They want you to. I hesitated, but I had to know. I reached out to the nearest handle, drawer 3. The moment my fingers brushed the cold metal, the air in the room shifted. It felt charged, as if the world had paused to inhale. And then I heard it faint, like breath against the ear, a whisper. It wasn't words at first, just the soft rush of air, the cadence of speech without meaning. Then slowly, the syllables formed, heavy and distant. Leave him be. I stepped back sharply. Mr. Blackwood was shaking now, muttering something under his breath, rhythmically. A prayer? A plea? No, something darker. I crouched down beside him again. What are you saying? His eyes rolled up toward the ceiling. His lips bled where he'd bitten them. Forgive me, he murmured. Forgive me for waking them. I took the book from his pocket. The cover was indeed old, leather cracked and stiff, its surface etched with faint sigils burned into the hide. The pages smelled of smoke and dust. Most of the text was written in Latin, but not the Latin of Scripture. These were invocations, rituals. Ones meant not to pray, but to summon. And beneath one of the sigils, I saw an inscription scrawled in fresh ink. The dead do not sleep. They wait to be remembered. A cold dread settled into me. Mr. Blackwood, I said quietly, you've called something that doesn't belong here. You need to let me perform a rite of banishment. He shook his head slowly. It won't leave. Why not? His lips parted in a trembling smile that broke my heart. Because it doesn't want to leave me, Father. It says I'm its voice now. Something inside the lockers knocked. Once, twice, then again faster. The air filled with the hollow rhythm of fists or something like them beating from within the steel drawers. The sound came from all 6. Margaret screamed from the top of the stairs. Gregory, what's happening? I shouted for her to stay back. The room trembled faintly as the knocking grew louder. Then came a scrape metal against metal and one of the drawers slid open by itself. Inside was darkness. But deep within that darkness, I saw the faintest shimmer of movement. Not a body, not a face, just a shape. Something formless, yet watching. Mr. Blackwood collapsed forward, his forehead striking the floor once more. Blood pooled beneath him, dark and thick. I began to pray not the prayer of salvation, but the old exorcism right from the Book of Deliverance. The words came easily, though my hands shook as I formed the cross. Spirit of the unclean, I command thee depart from this place of rest. The lights flickered violently. The shadow inside the locker twisted, stretched, and pulled back into the darkness like smoke drawn by a breath. The temperature rose suddenly. The sound stopped. And then, silence. Mr. Blackwood lay motionless. I knelt, checked his pulse still there, faint but steady, his breathing shallow. The blood beneath his head had formed a perfect circle on the tile floor. Inside it, the pattern of a sigil was visible lines, drawn not by human intention but by chance. And yet, it was the same symbol I'd seen in the book. That was no accident. I wrapped the book in a cloth and placed it in my satchel. When I looked back, his eyes had opened. "Father," he whispered, "did you hear it?" "Hear what?" He smiled faintly. "It said, 'Thank you.'" I left the mortuary just before dawn. The fog had lifted, replaced by a thin, pale light. Margaret met me on the porch, eyes swollen from crying. "He's resting now," I told her. "Don't wake him. Don't go down there." She nodded weakly. As I turned to leave, I glanced back toward the basement door. It was closed now, bolted shut, but just before I stepped outside, I heard it again, soft, almost tender, from deep within the walls. Thud, 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 the rhythm of penance, the price of the curious. And though I didn't know it then, that night in Asheville was only the beginning, for the dead, once called, never stop answering. The mortuary was quieter than usual that night. The rain had stopped, but the smell of wet soil lingered, crawling through the open vents and mixing with the sterile scent of formaldehyde. Pastor Gregory stood beside the embalming table, his breath misting faintly in the cold air. Every metal drawer along the far wall gleamed faintly under the dim lights, 32 of them in total, each one housing a body that was supposed to rest in silence. But they did not. Gregory first noticed it when he knelt to pray. A faint clicking echoed from the lowest drawer like fingernails tapping against steel from the inside. He froze, uncertain if it was his mind playing tricks or if the thing that had frightened Mr. Blackwood was now awake again. Then came the sound of breath. Soft, human, coming from nowhere and everywhere. "Pastor," a whisper slithered through the dark, dry as paper and wet as rot. He turned sharply. The sound came from the second row of drawers, the ones with name tags dulled by years of use. The middle one trembled faintly, the handle vibrating against its slot. Gregory forced himself forward. He gripped the cold steel handle, murmured a verse from Deuteronomy, and pulled. The drawer slid open with a slow, reluctant screech. Inside lay a woman's body, wrapped in a gray sheet. Her eyes were sewn shut, her lips wired closed. But her chest, it moved. Gregory staggered back, nearly dropping his Bible. He could see the faint rise and fall of her sternum, shallow but rhythmic. It wasn't the breath of the living. It was a memory of breath, a body remembering the act of dying. Behind him, another drawer opened on its own. Then another, one by one. The doors of the dead began to whisper open. He clutched the silver crucifix hanging from his neck and said softly, "Show yourself. You have lingered long enough." A voice answered from every direction. He asked us to. He wanted to hear what silence sounds like. Gregory's stomach turned. Blackwood? The drawers trembled harder now, their handles rattling like teeth. "He mocked us," said the same voice. "He woke us. We borrowed his warmth to remember what it felt like to be touched." Then the middle drawer slammed shut so hard the metal dented. Gregory's reflection in the polished steel rippled, twisted, and for a brief moment it smiled back at him. He stepped closer, eyes narrowing. The reflection moved slightly out of sync with his real motion, its mouth opening wider, showing black gums and broken teeth. "You are not them," Gregory said. "You are the one beneath them." And the reflection grinned wider, blood beginning to pour from the seam of the drawer as if the mortuary itself were bleeding. "Names mean nothing here," it hissed. "He gave us a door. You give us a voice." Gregory felt a cold hand brush the back of his neck. He swung around, but there was nothing, only air thick with the stink of old blood. His Bible dropped open on the floor, its pages fluttering as if by unseen wind. When he looked back, the reflection was gone. All the drawers were closed again, perfectly aligned, polished, obedient. The silence that followed was unbearable, so complete it roared in his ears. Then came a single knock, from inside the drawer nearest him. I hesitated. The knock repeated 3 slow beats. Gregory bent closer, his ear almost against the steel. A whisper slipped through the gap, barely audible. "He's in here with us." He stumbled backward, colliding with the embalming table. His trembling hand reached for the crucifix again, but the chain broke, as if snatched from behind. Something icy brushed his collar. The lights flickered. In that half-second of darkness, Gregory saw them. Dozens of pale faces pressed against the glass windows of their drawers, eyes wide open, mouths working soundlessly in unison, each mouthing the same phrase, "The mortician is still working." When the light came back, every drawer was sealed again. Not a single trace of movement remained, except for one. The topmost drawer, Mr. Blackwood's assigned section. It was open just an inch, enough for a single droplet of blood to roll down from the inside and splash on the tiled floor. Gregory whispered, "Lord have mercy," and stepped back slowly toward the door. But before he could leave, the mortuary clock above the doorway struck midnight 12, low, resonant tolls that echoed across the cold, dead hall. And on the final toll, the drawers answered, not with whispers, but with laughter. The silence that followed the laughter was worse than the sound itself. It lingered in the chilled air of the mortuary, thick as fog, pressing against Pastor Gregory's eardrums until he could almost hear his own blood pulse. The metal drawers were still. The fluorescent lights above flickered, casting long pale bands of light over the tiled floor, over the faint smear of blood that trailed from where Mr. Blackwood had been dragged or had crawled away. Gregory took a slow breath, his hand tightening around the silver cross that hung from his neck. It was warm, though it should have been cold. That warmth made him uneasy. "Mr. Blackwood?" His voice barely echoed. No answer. Only the hum of the refrigeration units, faint and rhythmic like distant breathing. He moved deeper into the mortuary, past the autopsy tables covered with white sheets, each sheet hiding a form too still to be mistaken for life. The air smelled of disinfectant and iron. It was the scent of the dead, clean and wrong. When he reached the row of drawers where the sound had come from, he saw it. One drawer, half open, the metal lip glistening with condensation. His fingers hovered above it. A whisper slipped out from within. "Not him." Gregory froze. The voice was small, papery, like something rustling between teeth. Then silence again. He leaned closer. "Who are you?" he asked softly. "The one he woke," came the reply, almost tender. "The one he mocked." A faint rattle of bones followed the words. Gregory's breath caught. He reached for the drawer handle and pulled it open. Inside lay a body, or rather, the remnants of one wrapped in linen that had darkened with time. The tag at its feet had faded almost to illegibility, but something else caught his attention. An object on the chest, half hidden beneath the wrapping. A book, or something like one. A block of thick parchment, bound with what looked like sinew instead of thread. Gregory reached out and brushed away the dust. His fingertips recoiled at the touch. It wasn't paper. It was bone, tiny slats of carved femur, sanded flat and etched with blackened words in a language he didn't recognize. The Bone Testament. He swallowed hard. His training told him to stop, to call for the diocese, to seal the room and pray. But curiosity, or perhaps duty, pulled him deeper into the sin. He lifted the artifact. The instant he did, the air in the mortuary shifted. The light steadied, too bright, and then dimmed to a heartbeat pulse. The sheet on the next table twitched, and Gregory heard a whisper, not from one direction, but from everywhere. "Read." He tried to drop the book. It clung to his hand, bone grinding faintly against his palm, as though fused there. The writing on the slats shimmered, rearranging itself into words he could now understand. "The keeper must pay in marrow what he has taken in laughter." He blinked. What he has taken in laughter. Then realization struck. Blackwood. The man had laughed at the dead, desecrated them for amusement. The price was not metaphorical. It was physical. The thing in the drawers wasn't simply haunting him. It was collecting. A sudden thud interrupted his thoughts. From across the room, one of the bodies sat up under its sheet, the fabric rising and falling like a breath. Gregory stumbled back, clutching the bone pages tighter. The body tilted its head beneath the cloth and spoke in Mr. Blackwood's voice. "Make it stop, please." Gregory's throat went dry. "Blackwood?" The sheeted figure trembled, its movements jerky, as if something unseen were pulling the strings from beneath the table. He said it was only words. It gurgled. He said the dead couldn't hear. But they did. They always hear. Lie. The mortuary lights flickered again, and the figure's head tilted sharply to one side, the neck bending too far. A sound like a snapped branch echoed. When the lights steadied, the figure was still again, slumped, silent. Gregory felt his heartbeat thudding painfully against his ribs. He looked down at the bone book, its surface now warm, pulsing faintly, as though blood flowed through it. The black ink text had changed again. "The sin continues until the testament is sealed." He stared. Sealed how? As if in answer, the drawer beside him rattled open. Inside lay another corpse, fresher, its chest sunken, ribs exposed. Between them, something glowed faintly, a small symbol, carved into the bone itself, the same sigil as on the cover of the testament. Gregory's mind raced. The words, the symbols, the laughter, all of it was part of a ritual. Blackwood had awoken something bound by covenant. The only way to seal it again was through offering, the marrow debt. He heard movement behind him, soft, dragging footsteps. He turned sharply. Mr. Blackwood stood at the doorway, swaying. His face was a ruin of bruises and dried blood, but his eyes, they were vacant, hollowed out like someone else was staring from inside. "Pastor," Blackwood croaked, his lips barely moving. "It's still hungry." Gregory stepped forward, holding up the cross. "You've been marked. It won't let go unless—" "No," Blackwood interrupted, a grotesque smile twitching across his mouth. "I read it too. I tried to give it what it wanted, but it doesn't want forgiveness. It wants remembrance. It wants to be known." Gregory frowned. "Known?" Blackwood's grin widened. "You can't bury what was never named. You can't silence what was mocked." Yeah. His body convulsed, the tendons in his neck straining as his mouth opened wider, impossibly wide, as if his jaw were being pulled from within. A faint chanting rose from the drawers around them, hundreds of dead voices murmuring the same phrase. "We are the unremembered." The temperature dropped. Frost began to spread across the floor tiles, climbing the legs of the tables, coating the handles of the drawers. Gregory's breath became mist. He stumbled backward as Blackwood's body fell to its knees, bones cracking audibly beneath the skin. Then, in one horrible motion, Blackwood tore open his own shirt and pressed his hands against his ribcage. "It wants to write," he rasped. "It needs a new page." The sound that followed was indescribable, wet, hollow, a mixture of tearing flesh and snapping wood. Blackwood's chest split open like a door. Inside, instead of organs, was a hollow cavity lined with pale bone. From that cavity, a long blackened arm extended too thin, too long, its fingers ending in nails that gleamed like obsidian. The creature that emerged was neither corpse nor shadow, but something between a congregation of bones stitched with darkness. It crawled out, towering over Gregory. The sockets where eyes should be glowed faintly, with a blue-white flame. "You woke the testament," it said, voice layered with countless echoes. "Now you will write." Gregory raised the cross high. "I did not summon you." "But you heard," it hissed. Hearing his consent. Before he could react, the creature lunged forward, its hand pressing against his chest. Pain seared through him, cold, then burning. Images flooded his mind. The countless bodies that had passed through the mortuary, the laughter, the disrespect, the forgotten names. Every insult, every desecration carved itself into his thoughts. He screamed, collapsing to the floor. The bone testament clattered beside him, open once more. His blood, bright red, dripped onto the bone pages. The words absorbed it, glowing faintly. "One more keeps the gate." The creature leaned close, its breath like winter wind. "You will finish his debt, shepherd." Gregory, trembling, forced himself to his knees. "No," he gasped. "I serve the living God." "And yet you kneel before the dead," it replied, amused. With that, the thing reached for Mr. Blackwood's fallen body. It lifted him effortlessly, folding him backward until his bones cracked. Then it began to merge with him, its skeletal arms wrapping around him like vines, sinking into his skin until all that remained was the shape of one man again. Blackwood stood, but his eyes now burned with that pale light. "Pastor," he said, his voice layered with the creature's tone. "He's not gone. He's only deeper." Gregory staggered back toward the exit. "You can't stay here. This place will remember." Blackwood finished for him. "That's what it wants. That's what we are. Memory." Gregory turned and fled. The doors swung shut behind him, locking with a metallic thud. From within, he heard one final whisper, soft, almost gentle. "Seal it, Shepherd, or we'll come knocking." He ran into the cold night air, collapsing against the hood of his car. The mortuary loomed behind him, windows dark, but something moved within shadows crossing like waves. He looked down at his hands. Tiny flecks of frost still clung to his fingertips. The cross at his chest was cracked down the middle. On the passenger seat of his car lay the bone testament. He hadn't taken it, but it was there, closed, trembling faintly, and written across the cover, in fresh crimson script that hadn't been there before, were 5 new words. "The shepherd has been chosen." Gregory stared until the words began to fade, sinking into the bone as though they had never existed. Then he realized what the creature had meant. Blackwood had paid his price. Now it was his turn. The laughter faded, but the echo of it lingered thin as dust and just as inescapable. Pastor Gregory waited until even the hum of the refrigerator motors sounded too loud. Only then did he move. The mortuary smelled of bleach and copper, the usual peace of the dead replaced by a trembling unease. One of the drawers stood half open, a pale edge of linen visible within. He almost called out to Mr. Blackwood, thought better of it, and stepped closer. The tag on the drawer had no name, only a date long rubbed to a smear. Something in the linen shifted when he touched the handle. A voice as thin as paper sighed. "Not him." Gregory drew back. "Who's there?" The one he woke. The one he mocked. He pulled the drawer the rest of the way. Inside lay a body wrapped so tightly it seemed to have shrunk inside its own skin. Across the chest rested a small object, bone white, bound with what looked like tendon. When he brushed the dust away, he saw it was not parchment at all, but panels of polished bone, etched in black ink that pulsed faintly under the light. He lifted it before he could think. The mortuary lights flickered once, steadied, and the air pressed in like water. "Read," whispered the walls. He tried to drop the thing, but his palm would not open. The script twisted into English. "The keeper must pay in marrow what he has taken in laughter." A drawer slammed somewhere behind him. Then another. A rhythm began. Bang, pause, bang, as if the dead were knocking from within. Gregory turned, heart hammering. One of the sheet-covered shapes on a table sat upright. The sheet swelled and fell, as if breathing. "Mr. Blackwood," he called, "make it stop." The shape croaked, voice unmistakably his. "They hear the laughter they always hear." And the head under the cloth jerked sideways, with a sound like breaking sticks, and went still. The lights dimmed. The bone pages in Gregory's hand throbbed warmly. "The sin continues until the testament is sealed." "How?" he whispered. The nearest drawer slid open of its own accord. Inside, a rib cage lay split, and carved upon the bone was the same sigil that marked the cover of the book. Frost gathered on the metal edge. The sound came from the doorway, bare feet dragging. Mr. Blackwood stood there, face a ruin of dried blood, eyes emptied of everything human. "It's still hungry," he said. "You've been marked," Gregory told him. "You must repent." "I tried," Blackwood interrupted, smiling too wide. "It doesn't want forgiveness. It wants remembrance." You can't bury what was never named. He convulsed, jaw opening until the tendons showed. From all the drawers around them a chant began, hundreds of whispering mouths. We are the unremembered. And the temperature plunged. Frost spread across the tiles. Blackwood fell to his knees, clawed at his chest, and tore it open as if unbuttoning a coat. Inside the cavity, darkness writhed. Out of it climbed something tall and jointed, made of bone and absence. Eye sockets glowing pale blue. You woke the testament, it said. Now, you will write. Gregory raised his cross. I did not summon you. You heard, it hissed. Hearing is consent. Its hand pressed against his chest. Cold burned through him. He saw flashes the bodies mocked, the careless laughter, the forgotten names. Every insult carved itself into his mind. He screamed. Blood fell onto the testament. The pages drank it greedily. One more keeps the gate. You will finish his debt, the creature murmured. Shepherd. Gregory forced himself upright. No, I serve the living God. And yet you kneel before the dead. It folded itself around Blackwood, sinking into him like smoke. When it straightened again, it wore his shape. His voice doubled with its own. He's not gone, it said. He's only deeper. Gregory stumbled for the exit. You can't stay here, remember? The thing answered. That's all we are. He fled. The mortuary doors slammed behind him. Outside, the night smelled of thawing earth. He leaned against his car, shaking. Through the dark windows he thought he saw movement shadows crossing like waves. On the passenger seat lay the bone testament. He had not brought it. Its cover quivered. 5 words appeared in wet red script. The shepherd has been chosen. They faded as he watched, sinking back into the bone. Mr. Blackwood had paid his price. Now the debt was his. The following morning broke with a heavy fog that refused to lift. Pastor Gregory hadn't slept. The bone testament sat on the table of his rectory, wrapped in a torn bedsheet and bound with a belt. No matter where he hid it, inside a drawer, beneath the floorboards, behind the church altar, he would always hear it. A faint ticking. Not mechanical, not quite natural either, like 2 bones tapping together in the dark. The rhythm never changed. It beat in time with his pulse. He'd left the mortuary hours before dawn, driving without memory of how he reached home. He had meant to burn the book. He had even poured lamp oil into the fire pit behind the chapel. But when he struck the match, the flames had turned blue and gone out. That was when he realized it didn't want to be destroyed. Now, sitting in the cold morning light, he wondered whether it wanted something else from him, something he hadn't yet given. He opened his Bible, searching for scripture to steady himself, but the letters seemed to blur. Every O in the text had deepened into a hollow circle, like eyes carved into paper. He blinked hard. The image remained. From outside came the sound of shovels, the groundskeeper, old Elias, turning the cemetery soil. Gregory rose to the window. The fog was thick, rolling across the graves in waves. He saw Elias moving slowly, his shoulders bent, shovel rising and falling in steady rhythm. But there was something wrong about the motion. He wasn't digging into the ground, he was smoothing it over, pressing the earth flat as if trying to hide something. Elias? Gregory called through the glass. The old man didn't answer. When Gregory opened the door and stepped outside, the air bit into his lungs. Moist, metallic, like the inside of a coffin. The fog muffled every sound but his own footsteps. Elias was standing by the far fence when Gregory reached him, his back still bent. Elias, what are you doing? Gregory asked. The shovel froze mid-motion. Slowly, the man turned. His eyes were open, but his pupils were gray, cloudy as the sky. I'm keeping the gate, he said. Gregory's breath caught. What gate? The one beneath, Elias murmured. The soil remembers, Pastor, it always does. Gregory stepped back. Elias smiled faintly, a wet, lifeless thing, and returned to pressing the earth flat, each shovel stroke perfectly even, like a ritual. When Gregory left him there and turned toward the chapel, he noticed the graves. Every headstone, that had been upright yesterday was leaning forward slightly, as though bowing towards something underground. The fog pooled thicker between them, and beneath the mist came a faint sound, a whisper, rhythmic and low. He couldn't make out the words, but the cadence was unmistakable. A prayer, not to God, but to memory. Inside the chapel, the candles refused to stay lit. He tried lighting 3, one after another, but each flame bent sideways and died. The air was too still for wind. At last, in frustration, he unwrapped the bone testament. The instant the fabric came off, the candlelight flared, burning tall and steady. He could feel a pulse within the book now, faint but undeniable, like a heartbeat buried under stone. He opened it. The bone panels creaked softly, like ribs shifting. Across the inner pages, new lines had appeared, scratched in crimson ink. The shepherd shall plant the memory. The soil will bloom with what was forgotten. Gregory stared, bile rising in his throat. He slammed it shut. "No," he whispered. "You will not make me your vessel." But when he looked up, the pews were no longer empty. Shapes sat upon them, silhouettes of people he had buried over the years. Mrs. Holloway, the widow who had died alone in her farmhouse. Young Peter Crane, lost to fever. Even little Mary Lennox, her white dress still damp from the river where she had drowned. They were all facing him, heads bowed, hands folded neatly in their laps. "You have to stop this," Gregory said, voice trembling. None of them moved. Then one lifted her head, Mary. Her skin was pale as moonlight, eyes bottomless pools of gray. "You prayed for our peace," she said softly. "But you never remembered our names after the service ended." The others nodded in unison. "The soil remembers," they whispered. He staggered backward, clutching his cross, but even that felt hollow now. The metal was cold and heavy, its edges slick with moisture that wasn't sweat. "You were supposed to guide us," another voice said, Elias's, though his body was still outside. "But you left our stories to rot. We were only flesh to you." Gregory fell to his knees. "You're not them," he pleaded. "Hear what the book wants me to see." "Does it matter?" Mary asked gently. "A memory is still real, even if it haunts you." By dusk, the fog had thickened into darkness. Gregory could no longer tell whether hours had passed or minutes. He tried to leave the chapel, but every door led him back inside. The pews were empty now, yet the air thrummed with presence. He sat before the altar, the testament open in front of him. The text was changing again, bleeding, reforming. A single line emerged, etched with light, one seed for each forgotten name. M, he realized, with slow horror, what it wanted. A ritual of remembrance. A planting. It wanted him to dig. Outside, Elias's shovel clanged. The sound was no longer rhythmic, but frenzied. Gregory stepped into the graveyard once more. Elias was gone. In his place, dozens of small mounds had appeared, each one newly turned, each one marked by a stick of bone driven into the earth like a seedling. He bent to one and brushed the dirt aside. Beneath the topsoil lay not roots, but teeth, a cluster of human teeth tangled in something black and fibrous, still moving. Gregory stumbled back, retching. When he looked again, the mound was gone. In its place, the earth had flattened perfectly smooth, like nothing had ever been disturbed. He felt something under his shoe, a vibration, faint but deep. The ground was breathing. "The soil remembers," came a whisper right beside his ear. He spun around, but no one was there. The whisper came again, this time from beneath his feet. He dropped to his knees, pressing his ear to the ground. What he heard made him freeze. Thousands of voices, murmuring in unison, not cries of pain, but prayers. Each voice recited a name, names of the dead, names he recognized from funeral records, old parish notes, graves long forgotten under moss. They were reciting themselves. And then, from within that chorus, one voice rose louder, clear, male, and horribly familiar. Pastor Gregory. His heart seized. Blackwood. He whispered. "The gate is open," the voice said calmly. "The soil has remembered. You will finish the planting." Gregory looked down at his hands. The soil had crept up past his wrists, slick and cold, pulling him slowly downward. He tried to stand, but the ground clung to him like wet cloth. He reached for the testament lying nearby, but it opened of its own accord, its pages fluttering until they stopped on a single blank bone slab. A hollow voice spoke through him, using his throat. "Write their names." His fingers began to move without command, dragging across the page. Letters appeared carved from his own nails, bleeding into the bone. One name after another, endless, unstoppable. Every person he had ever buried. Every name he had ever forgotten to speak again after the coffin closed. With each name, the soil around him stirred, bulging like something beneath it was rising to meet the air. He screamed, "No more! I remember. I remember them all." The wind shifted, carrying the scent of rot and lilies. The voice keyed. Then, from beneath the nearest grave, a hand emerged, pale, withered, clutching a piece of bone. Another hand followed, then dozens, hundreds. Each hand held a fragment of what looked like the same material as the testament, and together, they began to assemble something vast beneath the surface. A cathedral of bone and memory. Gregory felt the earth tremble. The book in his hand pulsed one final time and sealed itself shut. Its surface now covered in engraved names, every name he had written, every sin of forgetfulness confessed. The fog receded. When dawn broke, the cemetery looked untouched. Elias was nowhere to be found. The grave stood upright again. Gregory sat on the chapel steps, his hands stained with dirt, the testament resting in his lap. It was silent now. Still, the ticking had stopped. For the first time, he thought it might truly be over. But when he looked at the earth stretching before him, he saw movement, gentle, subtle. From the soil, tiny white shoots were beginning to sprout. Not flowers, bones, smooth and curved, like the beginnings of fingers reaching toward the Sunday. The soil had remembered, and soon, the world would too. The first sign that the soil had begun to breathe came just before dawn. Pastor Gregory stood outside the mortuary, where a pale mist slithered across the grass, curling between gravestones like a living organism. The air smelled of rain and rust. He had spent the night inside the chapel, praying beside the unconscious body of Mr. Blackwood, though praying felt almost pointless now. Every psalm came out hollow. Every verse returned to him like an echo that wasn't his own. He hadn't meant to fall asleep, but fatigue had claimed him. And now, as he opened his eyes, the chapel felt de-altered. The crucifix on the wall had tilted slightly to the left. The flowers on the altar had withered overnight, their stems bending toward the floor as if bowing to something unseen. And the earth outside was breathing. Gregory felt it first as a vibration through his boots, slow, rhythmic, like the heartbeat of something massive sleeping beneath the ground. Then came the sound, a low, resonant hum, deep enough to rattle the windows yet eerily melodic. He turned to Blackwood, who lay still on the table, pale as wax. His lips twitched. "Pastor," came a voice dry and faint, like paper scraping stone. Gregory froze. "Mr. Blackwood?" But the eyes that opened weren't entirely human. The irises shimmered faintly with a metallic sheen, the color of old coins. "It's still hungry," Blackwood whispered. "You didn't finish the ritual." Gregory's stomach tightened. The ritual was not meant to feed it. It was meant to end it. Blackwood smiled, or tried to. His face cracked slightly at the corners of his mouth, and a thin line of blood slipped down his chin. "Then you failed. Because it's awake now, and it remembers." Gregory looked toward the window. Beyond the frost-glazed glass, the cemetery rippled. The mist moved in pulses, expanding and contracting, as if the land itself were breathing. The gravestones seemed to sway. Some fell, and beneath them the earth bulged. He grabbed his Bible, but it felt like holding a dead object, just weight and paper. "You've brought this upon yourself," he said. You mocked the dead. You broke the veil. I only opened the door, Blackwood murmured. But doors open both ways. Then his back arched. His body convulsed violently, and Gregory stepped back in horror as something dark and fibrous began to crawl beneath his skin, thin lines, black as ink, moving like roots through flesh. They wriggled upward from his arms into his neck. The air thickened with the smell of soil. "Help me," Blackwood gasped. "It's inside." A sound interrupted him. It was not a scream, but a chorus, hundreds of whispering voices rising from beneath the mortuary floor, chanting in unison. The same word, over and over, in a language that didn't belong to the living. Gregory stumbled toward the door, but when he pulled it open, the mist rushed in, heavy and cold as seawater. It wrapped around him, filled his lungs, stung his eyes. Shapes began to take form within it, faces, blurred and shifting, mouths open in silent prayer. Then came the first echo. A body rose from the ground outside the chapel. Not a corpse in decay, but something reassembled, remade. The figure was tall, its limbs wrong in proportion, as if stretched by unseen hands. The face was featureless, save for a hollow mouth, which moved soundlessly. Gregory knew instinctively. This was not resurrection. This was reclamation. The dead weren't returning. The soil was simply remembering them. He slammed the door shut and dropped to his knees. His hand shook as he traced the sign of the cross in the air. "Lord, deliver us from..." The chapel door shuddered violently. Once. Twice. Then burst open. Wind howled through the hall, scattering pages of the Bible across the floor. Candles went out. The only light came from the narrow slit of dawn through the window, turning the mist a sickly gray. The figure in the doorway stepped inside. It moved with jerky precision, as if unsure of how bones should bend. Gregory recognized the clothes. It was Blackwood's body, but his face was wrong. His skin had split open like old bark, and beneath it was something like wood, like root, alive and moving. "You shouldn't be here," Gregory whispered. Blackwood tilted his head. When he spoke, his voice wasn't alone. It carried with it the voices of many, layered and echoing. "We were never gone." Gregory stumbled back toward the altar. "In the name of God." "God does not own this soil," the voices answered. "This ground was consecrated long before your prayers, before your kind gave names to death." The root-like tendrils pushed through the seams of the chapel's wooden floor, snaking around Gregory's ankles. He tore at them, but they only multiplied, wrapping tighter, dragging him down. The pews trembled. The stained glass cracked, spiderweb fractures spreading outward from the image of the crucified Christ. The figure's painted eyes seemed to close. Gregory screamed not in fear, but in fury. He raised his Bible and slammed it onto the ground, shouting words in Latin, the old rites of banishment. The tendrils recoiled slightly, hissing like steam. For a moment he thought it was working. Then a voice, soft, feminine, and heartbreakingly familiar, rose from beneath him. "Gregory." He froze. The sound was his wife's. "Gregory, you left me in the ground." He looked down. The roots at his feet had taken shape, forming fingers. A face. Her face. Pale. Eyeless. But unmistakable. "No," he whispered. "It's not you." "It is everything you buried," the voice said. "Every lie you told at the pulpit. Every name you spoke over the dead without faith. We remember." The ground split open. From the fissure emerged countless shapes, arms, torsos, skulls, all made of soil and root, rising in a tide of memory and hunger. Their mouths opened in unison, and the chapel filled with a low, vibrating hum, the same echo Gregory had heard in the cemetery. He realized now what it was. It wasn't noise. It was language. The soil was singing its own scripture. Gregory fell to his knees as the hymn rose. Pages of the Bible lifted off the floor, swirling in the air like dead leaves. The words on them turned black, then blank, as if erased by an invisible hand. Blackwood, or what had once been Blackwood, walked slowly toward him. "You prayed for their peace," he said, voice echoing through the chorus. "But peace is the lie you told the living. There is only the return." Gregory looked up, tears streaming down his face. Then tell me, what do you want? Blackwood leaned close, his mouth impossibly wide. We want to be remembered. The tendrils surged. They wrapped around Gregory's arms, chest, throat. He felt the cold of the earth entering him, replacing the warmth of blood. His last thought was that the chant sounded almost beautiful now. Terrible, yes, but harmonious, as though each echo found its place in an ancient choir. When the sun finally rose over the cemetery, the chapel stood silent. No movement inside, no breath, only the faint scent of soil and blood. A few days later, townsfolk found the place deserted. Mr. Blackwood's nameplate was still on the mortuary door. Pastor Gregory's car was parked outside, keys still in the ignition. Inside on the altar, they found something odd. A small wooden cross, hand-carved, planted upright in a mound of fresh earth that hadn't been there before. Around it lay the open pages of a Bible, every line erased except for one, written in ink that looked too dark to be human. From dust thou art, and unto dust thou shalt return. That night, the wind blew through the cemetery again. The drawers in the mortuary clicked open and closed, one by one, like an unseen hand taking inventory. And deep beneath the soil, where the echoes slept, something stirred. It whispered through the roots, through the bones, through the memories that would never decay. The harvest is complete. The 603 enigma. The stairwell smelled like damp concrete and detergent. That was the first thing Alex noticed each morning when he came home from his night shift. The second thing was the silence, thick, viscous, as though it had weight. The building was old, built in the early 1970s, a maze of beige hallways and humming lights that flickered every few seconds. Some nights, it felt like he was the only person alive in all 7 floors of the Easton residences. He lived in 703, a narrow one-bedroom apartment with a leaky window and a view of the neighboring parking lot. Beneath him, directly below, was 603 Miss Chen's apartment. He didn't know her first name. He barely knew her face, only that she existed. Every night at 4 a.m., when Alex came home, he heard her. The faint sound of heels clicking along the corridor, a key sliding into a lock, a door creaking open. He had seen her once or twice, a small woman in a long gray coat, her dark hair tied back neatly, carrying a bag that always seemed too heavy for her frame. She never looked up, never greeted him. At first, he thought nothing of it. They were both creatures of the night. But after months of this quiet pattern, something about her movements began to unsettle him. There was precision in the way she turned the key, a slowness that suggested awareness not of habit but of ritual. He started noticing other things too. The smell of incense rising through the floorboards, a faint humming sound, sometimes like a woman whispering to herself. And once, while brushing his teeth, he heard 3 deliberate knocks beneath his feet. Not random creaks, but rhythmic, almost like someone asking to be let in. That night, he couldn't sleep. He got out of bed and leaned over the balcony, looking down through the stairwell's open shaft. The fluorescent light on the 6th floor was buzzing, half dead. He thought he saw a shadow standing by the door to 603, a shape that looked up toward him. Then the light blinked out, and when it came back, there was nothing. The next day, at work, he couldn't focus. The office computers hummed. The coffee tasted metallic. When he closed his eyes, he could still see that dark shape below him, head tilted at an unnatural angle, as though it knew he was watching. He told himself he was just tired. Working night shifts messes with the mind. But the thoughts festered. By the end of the week, curiosity won over caution. He mentioned Miss Chen casually to his neighbor on 702, a man named Terry who sold food out of a cart downtown. "You ever talk to the lady downstairs? In 603? Terry's face changed instantly. He was stirring sugar into his tea when Alex asked, but his spoon froze midair. "You mean the one who used to live there?" "What do you mean used to?" Terry stared at him, uncertain. "You're new here. You don't know. That apartment's been empty for years." Alex frowned. "No, that can't be right. I see her almost every night. Small woman, Long gray coat. Always comes home at 4. Terry slowly shook his head. That's not possible. There was a situation. Long time ago. You don't wanna. Alex interrupted, suddenly irritated. What kind of situation? Terry hesitated, then lowered his voice. A murder. They said it was bad. Woman was found in her bathtub, chopped up like... He stopped himself. Her name was Chen. Nobody ever found the head. After that, the building sat half empty for months. Management cleaned up and rented again, but no one stays long above that floor. A chill ran down Alex's spine. Above it? Terry nodded, eyes flicking upward toward the ceiling. Yeah, people say she doesn't like company up there. Alex forced a laugh. You don't actually believe that. But Terry didn't laugh back. I believe what I hear at night, he said simply and turned away. That evening, Alex stood in the hallway outside his door for a long time, listening. The corridor was silent. Only the steady dripping of a pipe somewhere in the distance. At 3:58, he heard the first sound, the click of heels on linoleum. At 3:59, the metallic rattle of a key in a lock. At 4, the soft groan of the door to 603 opening. He stepped quietly to the railing and leaned over, peering down. He caught a glimpse of her coat, a shimmer of gray fabric, the tilt of her head, her face briefly illuminated by the faint emergency light. Pale, unsmiling, eyes that seemed not to blink, and then she turned her gaze upward. For a moment, Alex froze. She couldn't possibly see him in the dark, but he felt it, a directness, a pull, like gravity reversing direction. She whispered something he couldn't hear. Then, with slow precision, she closed her door. The silence afterward was worse than the noise. Alex went back inside his apartment, locked the door, and pressed his ear to the floor. He expected nothing, but faintly, unmistakably, from the other side of the floorboards, came a sound like fingernails tracing the wood. Slow, careful, deliberate. He didn't sleep that night either. The next day he searched online. Murder in Easton Residences, 603. Most of the old articles were gone. Broken links, corrupted pages. One forum post remained, a thread dated nearly 10 years ago. The user, anonymous, had written, I used to live in 703. Don't rent it. You'll hear her walking. You'll think it's pipes. It's not. She's looking for what was taken. Don't open the door if she knocks. Beneath that, a single reply. She's not knocking. She's reminding you that you're living where he lived. That night, when Alex came home, he didn't turn on the lights. He just stood by the window, staring down at the faint orange glow leaking through the cracks of the blinds. He thought about Miss Chen's gray coat, about the apartment beneath him, and as the clock struck 4, a knock came at his door, soft, deliberate, 3 times. He waited, breath held, every muscle locked. When he finally gathered the courage to look through the peephole, he saw nothing, only the empty hallway and the flickering fluorescent light above. But from somewhere below, from 603, came a voice so faint it could have been imagined. Someone took what was mine. The words were followed by silence. Then, a single creak, like a drawer opening, and Alex realized, for the first time, that the sound wasn't coming from below him. It was coming from inside his apartment. The storm came that night, not with rain but with sound. A crawling, swelling hum seemed to seep from every wall of the farmhouse, as though the timbers themselves were remembering something terrible. Henry sat in the kitchen, a single lamp flickering weakly above his coffee. The liquid inside his cup quivered, forming concentric rings, as if something below the table was knocking softly on the underside of the floorboards. He told himself it was the pipes again. Old house, old bones. Things expand, things move. Houses remember weather, but deep inside, where superstition and instinct still whispered, he knew it was them. Earlier that day, when he'd been digging a trench behind the barn to divert runoff from the approaching storm, his spade had struck something solid, too shallow for bedrock, too smooth for root or pipe. It had sounded almost hollow. He'd crouched down, brushing away the damp soil with his fingers until he saw a faint curve of porcelain, gray and cracked. It wasn't a jar or a pipe or anything human-made for keeping. It was something shaped like a jaw. He'd stopped right there. The light had shifted oddly in that hour. Everything gold and dirty, and the air had gone thick as syrup. The earth around the object had almost seemed to breathe, rising and falling imperceptibly. He'd filled the hole back up. Quickly. Now, hours later. The sound had come back to find him. Henry rose from the kitchen table, chair scraping against the worn pine floor. The lamp buzzed faintly as he moved, casting shadows that warped across the ceiling like veins. He crossed to the pantry and pressed his ear to the floorboards. The hum below the house was clearer now, low and constant, like a deep cello note, but threaded through it were other things, faint clicking, rhythmic and deliberate like teeth tapping glass. Then, words. Not clear words, not human ones either. But the rhythm of speech was there, some ancient cadence that the floor translated into shivers beneath his bare feet. Henry whispered, "Who's there?" No answer. But the sounds shifted. The tapping turned to scraping, the hum to a murmur, and the murmur, God help him, to breathing. He staggered back, hand clamped over his mouth, his pulse hammered in his throat. The breathing came from everywhere. He could hear it behind the stove, under the sink, beneath the long hallway leading to the front door. Slow, patient breaths that moved through the house like drafts through hollow walls. He backed toward the stairs, every instinct screaming to leave, but the floor shifted under his heel, a subtle tremor like someone turning over beneath the boards. Something was alive under there. The next morning, Henry didn't sleep. He sat on the porch, staring out over the fields that rolled like a gray sea under the mist. The storm had passed without rain, leaving behind a silence that was somehow louder. The ground looked different now, darker, wetter, as if the soil had been churned overnight. He could see, faintly, the outline of where he dug the trench, a rough scar of loose dirt. But there were new marks too, small indentations in the earth, stretching from the trench toward the house. Dozens of them, footsteps, he thought, but not quite. They were shaped wrong, too narrow, too long, as if made by hands. He drove into town that afternoon to see Sheriff Ellis, an old family friend who'd known his father. "Probably coyotes," Ellis said, squinting at the Polaroid Henry had taken of the marks. "You said it was storming, ground gets soft, things sink weird. Don't go thinking too much on it." Henry hesitated. "Coyotes don't breathe under the floor." The sheriff looked up sharply. "Come again?" Henry almost said it, almost told him everything, the porcelain jaw, the hum, the words. But he saw something flicker behind Ellis's eyes, something that said he already knew. The sheriff leaned back in his chair. "That old house," he said slowly. "Your daddy bought it from the Harper estate, didn't he? After their boy went missing." Henry nodded. "Yeah, years back. Never thought much about it." "Good," Ellis said. "Keep it that way." When Henry frowned, the sheriff leaned forward. His voice dropped to a whisper. "You start hearing things in that house, Henry. Don't answer 'em." When? That night, the floor began to move again. It started subtle, like the rhythm of someone pacing under the boards, matching his footsteps in perfect counterpoint. Then came the whispers, clearer now, forming syllables that curled around the corners of the room. He, nay, re, his name. The sound rose up from below, not in one voice, but in dozens layered, overlapping, broken. He stumbled to the center of the living room and dropped to his knees, pressing his palms flat against the floor. "Stop," he shouted. "Please, stop." But the house answered. The boards swelled beneath his hands, as if something massive was pressing upward. The seams between the planks darkened, oozing faint trails of black liquid that smelled of rot and iron. Then bang, the hatch, the small wooden hatch in the hallway that led to the crawl space beneath the house, the one he'd never once opened, slammed upward, striking the wall with a crack. Something moved in the darkness below. He grabbed the lamp from the side table and approached slowly. The beam of light wavered, cutting into the hatch's square mouth. The soil beneath, looked freshly turned, and in it, he saw a face. Not a whole one, just the suggestion of one. A mask of gray-white earth shaped like human skin, its features faintly recognizable but shifting, as if remembering and forgetting themselves at once. Eyes without pupils. A mouth without air. When the wind pressed against the house, the soil around the face shifted, and the mouth seemed to move. Henry. The lamp fell from his hands, shattering against the floor. The voice rose now, echoing through the crawl space, multiplied and distorted, until it filled the house with 1,000 mouths whispering his name. He fled outside barefoot, into the wet grass. The air was sharp, metallic. From the yard he could see the house silhouetted against the pale moon, its windows glowing faintly from within, though he'd left no lights on. In the glass, movement, figures passing by, one by one, pale and thin, like silhouettes drawn in smoke. They drifted from room to room in a slow procession, each carrying something, a small box, a doll, a drawer. Henry realized, sickly, that they were pulling things out of the walls, as if the house itself contained their remains. When the last one passed by the upstairs window, it stopped and turned. Its face was his. By dawn, the noises stopped. The house went still. Henry stood in the hallway, filthy and shaking, staring down at the open hatch. The soil below was perfectly smooth again, like nothing had ever disturbed it. He knelt at the edge, peering into the dark. "What do you want?" he whispered. The air was thick, still, heavy with the scent of damp wood. Then, softly, a whisper, "Remember us." He blinked. "Who are you?" But the whisper came again, closer this time, brushing his ear from the wrong direction inside his head. The ones beneath, and before he could move, the floor shuddered. Not violently, no, just enough to make him lose balance, to make him reach out and touch the boards. They were warm now, pulsing faintly. When he lifted his hand, something pale was clinging to his skin, a thin, translucent film, like the membrane of an egg. Beneath it, faintly visible, a small tooth. He sealed the hatch that morning with nails, planks, and a prayer. He told himself he'd leave tomorrow, next week, soon. But at dusk, as he packed his things, the floor hummed again. This time, though, it wasn't angry. It was almost gentle, a rhythm like a lullaby, low and sorrowful, pulsing through the boards in soft waves. He sat down against the wall, exhausted. The sound vibrated up through his spine, into his ribs, until his breathing matched it. Then, as his eyes grew heavy, he heard them again. Stay. He wanted to run. He wanted to scream. But he was too tired, and the sound was too warm, too human. He lay down on the floor, cheek pressed to the boards. The hum deepened, wrapping around him like soil around a seed. And as sleep took him, he thought faintly that the floor beneath him moved to make room. When dawn came, the house was silent again. Only the faintest indentation in the dust marked where Henry had lain. The hatch was closed, sealed tight from the inside, and if you pressed your ear to the floor, you might still hear it. A single breath, slow and steady, echoing from beneath the wood. The earth had remembered another name. When the county men came 3 days later, they said nothing about Henry's disappearance. They said even less about the noise complaints. They left polite notes pinned to his front door, yellow slips that fluttered in the wind, like small nervous birds, but no one dared cross the threshold. Those who passed by the old farmhouse swore they could still hear movement within, faint as the creak of branches, like someone rearranging furniture in their sleep. And on still nights, when the fog rolled low across the fields, there came the sound of digging. Ellen arrived in late October. She was Henry's sister, though no one in town remembered her at first. She'd left years ago, chasing city work and forgetting country roots. When she returned, she came alone, a single suitcase clutched in both hands, her boots too clean for the mud of her brother's land. She found the farmhouse exactly as he'd left it. Lamps still faintly smoked, coffee mug fossilized with a ring of dried black liquid, the scent of earth heavy in every room. The air itself seemed thick, as though saturated with breath. Ellen moved carefully, whispering his name into each room. The sound didn't echo back. By dusk, she found the hatch. It was nailed shut, sealed with rough boards, a dozen rusted nails, and something stranger thin ribbons of wire twisted into shapes she almost recognized. Symbols, maybe. Letters that had forgotten what they once meant. Her brother's handwriting marked the beam nearby. Do not open. But below that, scrawled in a different color, faint and desperate, please, remember them. That night, Ellen dreamed of teeth. They fell like snow through the ceiling, clattering across the floor, white and soundless. Every tooth had a name carved into it. Henry's, her own, and dozens more she didn't know. When she woke, she could taste soil in her mouth. The days grew slower in that house. The clocks all ticked out of rhythm, as if each one was keeping time for a different heartbeat. Ellen found herself waking at the same hour every night, 3:11 a.m., to the sound of drawers sliding open downstairs. She would tiptoe into the hall, clutching her flashlight, its beam wobbling like a dying candle. Each time, she found one drawer in the living room, partially open. Inside, bones, not animal, small, childlike, arranged neatly in rows. By the third night, she stopped opening them. It was on the fifth morning that she found the first message. The sun had not yet risen. She sat at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around her coffee mug, when she saw that the condensation on the window had formed words, not written with a finger, not fogged by heat, just there, 3 words, beneath the hymn. Her heart twisted. The phrase echoed something from her childhood, one of her father's sermons, the ones he'd whispered like warnings instead of prayers. She found his old hymn book later that day in the attic, its pages damp and swollen with mildew. A bookmark rested between "Blessed are the fields and the valley shall rise again." But when she turned to that page, she found no hymn, only a pressed scrap of paper covered in faint black lines. At first, she thought it was a sketch, but as she tilted it toward the light, the image changed. The lines bent and curved, revealing the outline of a hand, not drawn, printed like a rubbing taken from bone. Below it, faint words written in Henry's hand. The soil speaks through marrow. Ellen's resolve wavered that night. She dreamed of Henry again, this time kneeling in the field behind the barn, his hands buried up to the wrists in the dirt. He was whispering something she couldn't hear. When she called his name, he looked up, but his mouth didn't move. Instead, his chest pulsed outward, ribs trembling, as though words were trying to crawl through them. Then his jaw split open along the hinges, and she saw roots growing from his throat, winding up around his face, bursting from the corners of his eyes. She woke screaming. The hatch downstairs answered with a single thud. By now, the air in the house had changed. It carried a scent she couldn't name, like rain-soaked dust and burnt sugar, and something underneath, metallic, almost sweet. The walls no longer felt flat when she touched them. They had a faint give, a soft thrum beneath the plaster, as though veins pulsed behind the wood. The hum had returned too, the same one Henry had written about in his letters. She could hear it faintly now, beneath every floorboard, beneath every silence, a low choir of breath rising and falling in rhythm. One night, she decided to follow it. She removed the planks from the hatch, one by one. The nails came free too easily, as though they wanted her to open it. The air that rose from below was warm, damp, and filled with a sound like whispering lips pressed against glass. She lowered the flashlight. The soil below gleamed wetly, almost alive. And in it, half buried, she saw hundreds of pale fragments. Not teeth this time. Ribs, tiny ones, arranged in spirals, curving outward from a central point beneath the house. Her breath caught as the beam passed over something else, a small wooden box, old and warped, its lid barely hanging on. Inside lay a single jawbone, child-sized, its surface carved with minute markings. She could make out letters, faint but clear. E.H., her initials. Ellen stumbled backward, choking on her own breath. She slammed the hatch shut, dropped to her knees, and whispered a prayer that came out broken and half forgotten. That was when she heard the footsteps. Soft, deliberate. Above her, someone or something was moving on the floor she'd just left. She froze, listening. One step, two, then a pause. Then, from the kitchen, the sound of drawers sliding open. "Henry?" she whispered. The floor above creaked. She waited. Then, 3 knocks. Slow, rhythmic. Knock, knock, knock. They came from directly over her head. She turned off the flashlight and pressed her ear to the wood. What she heard made her blood turn to ice. A voice, so faint it seemed to exist only between heartbeats. "Give them back." The next morning, Ellen went to town. She found Sheriff Ellis, older now, grayer, but still sharp-eyed. When she told him what she'd found, his face didn't change. He just sighed, rubbed his temple, and asked, "You opened it, didn't you?" Her silence was answer enough. "Your brother did too," he said. Didn't listen either. She leaned forward. "What's under that house, Sheriff?" He looked at her then, not like an officer, but like a man who'd already seen what she was describing. "They called it the Bone Field," he said quietly. "Back before the church burned. There was a preacher here, Reverend Harrow. Said the valley's dead couldn't rest in hollow ground. Said he could bind their spirits to the soil itself, make it fertile again. They buried the children first." Ellen's stomach turned. "Your house sits right on top of it. And that hum you're hearing? That's the hymn they never finished." That night, Ellen returned home with gasoline. She poured it along the walls, over the hatch, across the floors that breathed beneath her. The air grew heavy, murmuring softly as if pleading. She struck a match. The flame caught instantly, roaring up in a rush of golden light. And for one fleeting second, she saw them. Dozens of faces pressing against the walls from inside, mouths open in silent scream. The fire spread faster than she expected, racing through the old boards with unnatural hunger. She stumbled out into the yard, choking on smoke. Behind her, the windows pulsed with light. Then came a sound, not the crack of timber, not the collapse of roof beams, but a deep, human exhale. The house seemed to sigh, and then it fell quiet. By dawn, nothing remained but the chimney and a patch of scorched earth that still shimmered faintly as though breathing. Ellen watched from the road, her hands trembling. She could still hear the hum softer now, fainter, but it wasn't coming from the ruins. It was coming from the soil beneath her feet. She dropped to her knees, pressing her palm to the dirt. It was warm. Then something moved under her hand, a slow pulse, rhythmic, steady, and faintly, almost tenderly, a whisper rose through the soil. "Welcome home." The fire should have ended it. But fire, Ellen would learn, does not kill what has already buried itself in the roots of the world. By morning, the field was nothing but a scar-black ash and melted glass. The air still trembled with a ghost of heat, and when the wind shifted, the smoke carried the faintest smell of sweetness, like rotting fruit in late summer. Ellen stood in what used to be the kitchen, her boot sinking into the soft soil beneath the ashes. She'd burned everything. Henry's notes, their father's Bible, even the bone box. Yet something in the earth continued to hum. It came not from beneath, but through her, vibrating softly in her ribs, a strange low rhythm that matched her pulse. Every time she exhaled, the ground seemed to sigh with her. She spent the next 3 days sleeping in her truck on the road, but the dreams followed her there too. She saw the field as it once was, golden wheat swaying in the wind, the farmhouse still standing. But beneath that surface calm was movement, something shifting just below the topsoil, like muscle beneath skin. When she looked closer, she saw hands, thousands of them, pale and small, pushing upward through the dirt, grasping toward the Sunday. She'd wake gasping, with mud under her nails and the taste of iron in her mouth. On the 4th morning, a light rain began to fall. It should have been cleansing, but the droplets were dark, stained with ash and something oily. Where they hit the ground, the earth seemed to drink deeply, greedily. By dusk, Small sprouts were already breaking through the soil. Not green, but bone white. They twisted as they grew, curling into strange shapes, spirals, ribs, the curves of knuckles. She watched in silence as they rose, knowing without reason that they weren't plants. They were reminders, and the hum in her chest grew louder. Sheriff Ellis came by that evening. He didn't step out of his car, just rolled down the window and stared at the field, his face pale. "You should leave," he said finally. "This land's got memory." Ellen's eyes stayed fixed on the sprouts. "Then it remembers the wrong things." He hesitated, then added, "The preacher who built this place, Reverend Harrow, he used to say the earth keeps count. Every seed, every bone, every sin." He paused. "You can't cleanse it with fire, Ellen. You can only feed it." And then he drove away. That night, the rain turned red. She thought it was a trick of the light at first, the dying sun staining the drops as they fell. But when she touched her face, her fingertips came away crimson. The soil seemed to drink faster now. The white roots swayed, their surfaces slick, trembling with life. She tried to leave, she really did. But the hum followed her beyond the field, vibrating through the steering wheel, whispering in the static of the radio. When she reached the town line, every signpost was covered in the same faint, wet soil. Her headlights flickered. The road ahead seemed to blur and fold inward, as if refusing her escape. By dawn, she was back at the ruins. The sprouts had grown into a forest overnight. They weren't plants. They were structures, thin columns of bone rising in arcs, bending toward each other until they formed a rib cage that spanned the entire yard. Inside, the air was thick and alive. She could hear faint murmurs, too soft to be words, too rhythmic to be mere wind. And then she saw him. Henry, or what was left of him. He stood in the center of the bone archway, his eyes closed, his mouth slightly open. His skin was pale as the sprouts themselves, stretched tight as parchment. Beneath it, something pulsed and moved like worms shifting under fabric. When he spoke, the words did not come from his lips, but from the soil beneath them. "They forgave me." Ellen stumbled backward. "Henry, what did you do?" His head tilted slightly, as if listening to something only he could hear. "I gave them my breath," he said. "Now they sing through me." Let. He raised one trembling hand, and Ellen saw that his fingers had fused together, the skin forming smooth ivory tendrils that disappeared into the ground. "Don't fight it," he whispered. "They only want to remember." The earth shifted then, a low, grinding sound like a jawbone closing. Ellen turned to run, but her feet sank into the mud. No, not mud. Flesh. Pale, soft, and pulsing. It clung to her boots, wrapping around her ankles like tendrils, and she could feel the heartbeat in it, steady, deliberate. The hum rose to a drone. She fell to her knees, clawing at the ground, but the soil seemed to breathe beneath her. And in the wind she heard the faintest echo of a hymn. "Blessed are the fields that feed the dead." The same line from her father's sermon. Her vision blurred. The world pulsed red and white. The roots coiled up her legs, reaching toward her chest. Then she heard her brother again, closer now, though his mouth never moved. "They want what's left of us," he said. "Our bones remember what we've forgotten." When she woke, it was morning. The bone forest was gone. The house was gone. Henry was gone. The field looked normal, lush, quiet. But when she knelt and touched the soil, she felt it breathing. The sprouts were back green this time, small and delicate. She plucked one without thinking. A root dangled from it, thin and pale, shaped unmistakably like a finger. The hum had softened into a lullaby now, one she almost recognized. She thought of leaving again, but somehow, the thought of leaving them behind felt wrong. So she stayed. She rebuilt the porch first, then the fence. She cleaned the stone well and began planting rows. The soil was rich, unnaturally so. Her crops grew faster than anything she'd ever seen. At night, she'd sit on the steps, listening to the earth whisper beneath her feet. The voices were softer now, content, grateful. When the first harvest came, the wheat heads gleamed white in the moonlight. Ellen smiled, and when the wind passed through the fields, she could swear it carried her brother's voice. But deep beneath the soil, in the darkness where light could never reach, something stirred. It was not finished remembering. It was waiting, and soon it would begin to grow again. The seasons shifted with unnatural speed. Spring bled into summer, and the field never stopped growing. The soil remained warm, even at night. Even when the wind came sharp and cold off the coast, people began to talk about it. The woman who could make anything grow in dead earth. They came in trucks with empty baskets, asking for seed, for secrets. Ellen welcomed them with her new voice. Softer now, calm. Her eyes no longer reflected the color of the sky, but the pale of the roots that lay beneath. She told them she had learned what the soil needed, that it didn't want water or sunlight. It wanted memory, and the people laughed, as neighbors do when they think someone is strange but harmless. But they took her grain. They planted it in their own gardens. They fed it to their animals. They carried the hum home with them, unknowingly, into the places where they slept and prayed. The first sign came in the next town over, when the ground behind the church began to sink. At dawn, a grave split open, and the caretaker swore he saw something moving beneath the coffin. The police filled the hole, poured new concrete, and said nothing. Then came the river turned black with silt for one day, then cleared again. Fish floated to the surface, pale and eyeless. By the time anyone thought to ask Ellen what she had planted, her house was gone. In its place stood a structure of white stalks, woven tight as a cocoon. It pulsed faintly in the dark, and from within came the low, slow rhythm of breathing. Pastor Gregory returned. He had left the priesthood months ago, since the night in the mortuary. He had burned his vestments, sold his church. But the dream of Mr. Blackwood, the man whose skull he could still hear splitting against the floor, had not stopped visiting him. In the dream, Blackwood's voice came from beneath the soil, whispering, "It's your turn to tend the gate." So Gregory drove west until he found the field again. The grass was gone, replaced by a carpet of ivory shoots. Each one quivered as he stepped on it. He could feel the pulse travel up through his boots and into his calves. At the center stood the structure. It looked almost like a chapel made of bone. He called her name once. Ellen. The walls shuddered. Something within them moved, slow and fluid. A slit opened in the pale weave, revealing a hollow interior that smelled of warm soil and old breath. Entered. Inside, it was silent. Rows of roots hung from the ceiling, some still dripping with dark water. At the far end sat Ellen, cross-legged on the floor, her hands pressed into the dirt as if in prayer. Her face was calm, her lips parted slightly. Her skin had taken on a strange translucence. Thin veins of light moved beneath it like worms of fire. "Pastor Gregory," she said without looking up. He froze. "You? Know me?" "I remember everything," she whispered. "And so does the soil." "Hi." He stepped closer. "What have you done?" She smiled. "I listened. I stopped fighting what the world forgets." Gregory knelt beside her, the air vibrating against his chest like a heartbeat. "They're not grateful, Ellen. Whatever's under this land, it doesn't want peace. It wants continuance." "I know." Her fingers tightened in the dirt, "and it chose me." The ground shifted. Gregory stumbled backward as a tremor ran through the floor. Beneath Ellen, the earth split open, and something began to rise, a column of bone and soil, twisting together like strands of rope. Faces formed in the ivory knots, men, women, children, all pale and blind, their mouths half open. "The dead don't die," Ellen murmured. "They root. They remember." Gregory's throat tightened. He felt the weight of his own sins pressing down on him, the corpses he had blessed, the false comforts he had spoken to families, the prayers that went unanswered. "They're calling to you too," she said. "You were the first to open the gate." He turned to flee, but the structure had already sealed. The ivory walls had grown together, the slit of entry gone. The humming rose to a pitch that made the air shimmer. He fell to his knees, clutching his head, but the sound was inside him now. It wasn't a voice, it was thousands. The hum had become a choir, each tone shaped from a breath stolen long ago. Through the vibration came a word, stretched and layered until it lost all human shape. Remember. He woke some time later on the road. His hands were black with soil. His fingernails had grown long and pale. The structure was gone again. Only a flat field remained. But beneath the surface, faintly, the hum continued. He drove into town, his heart pounding with dread. The first thing he saw was a market stall selling white wheat labeled Blackwood grain. The farmer behind the table smiled at him. "Strange thing," the man said. "It grows anywhere, fast too. Makes the best bread you'll ever taste." Gregory stared at the sacks of pale seed. He thought he saw one of them move, as if something beneath the burlap were breathing. He backed away, shaking. The hum was louder now. It came not from the field, but from everywhere. The walls, the pavement, the air, the city itself seemed to vibrate. That night, he sat alone in a motel room and wrote his final entry. The land remembers. The dead do not rest. I thought sin was a stain on the soul, but it is a seed. We plant it when we die, and it grows in those who come after. I am tired. The hum will not stop. If you read this, burn the seed, but do not bury the ashes. The soil loves too deeply. He folded the paper and left it on the nightstand. Then he drove north, into the forests, until the road disappeared. No one ever found his car. A month later, a new crop began to grow near the old mortuary grounds. Thin, white reeds that whistled when the wind passed through them. Locals said the sound was like a choir. Children dared each other to pick them. None did twice. And when the harvest came that year, every loaf of bread baked within 100 miles carried the faint taste of iron. The people said it was the soil rich, full of memory. They were right. The crossroads bargain. The night Lena arrived in Beaufort, the air felt thick. Not humid in the normal southern way, but syrupy. Like every breath carried something that didn't want to leave her lungs. The marshes stretched endlessly, glimmering under a faint crescent moon. The taxi driver had turned the radio down halfway through the trip, muttering something about voices near the tide. She smiled, awkwardly, and looked out the window. But she could hear it too soft, overlapping whispers that didn't sound like frogs or wind. It was a woman's voice, layered over itself, repeating something unintelligible. Probably the salt wind, she told herself. When the car dropped her off in front of her aunt's house, a leaning colonial framed by moss-covered oaks, Lena's phone buzzed. One unread message. Unknown number. Don't stay out past midnight. The road talks back. She frowned, deleted it, and knocked. Her aunt, Miss Callista, greeted her with the same weary affection she always had. "You look pale, sugar. Travel wear you down?" Lena wanted to answer, but her attention caught on the dark hall behind her aunt. Someone was standing at the far end. A man, tall and skeletal, wearing what looked like a black raincoat. But when she blinked, he was gone. Miss Callista sighed. "You saw something, didn't you?" Lena hesitated. I mean the thing that don't belong here." The older woman ushered her inside, locking the door with 3 different bolts. The smell of sage and burnt herbs filled the air. A row of small glass jars lined the mantel, each holding a bit of hair, a scrap of cloth, or something darker. "I told Granny Alara you'd be comin'," Miss Callista said quietly. "She said the marsh already knows your name." That night, Lena couldn't sleep. The whispers outside grew louder around 2 a.m., not carried by the wind this time, but murmuring directly beneath her window. She got up, heart pounding, and peeked through the curtains. The marsh grass rippled, though there was no breeze. A shape was moving there, half woman, half shadow, dragging itself through the reeds toward the dirt road. And that's when Lena saw it. At the intersection past the house where 3 narrow roads met, something shimmered. It wasn't light exactly. It was presence, like the air was folding inward on itself. She heard the whisper again, clearer now. Come to the road, child. Come see what you asked to forget. Lena stumbled backward, knocking over a glass of water. It hit the floor and splashed her bare feet. For a moment, she thought she saw a reflection in the puddle, but it wasn't her. It was someone else, watching her from the other side, smiling with teeth too long and too sharp. In the morning, her aunt pretended nothing was wrong. She made grits and coffee, humming an old hymn under her breath. But when Lena mentioned what she'd seen, Miss Callista's humming stopped cold. Don't go near that crossroads again, she said sharply. Not until you've seen Alara. Who is she? Her aunt glanced toward the window. The woman who talks to the things that live between. Lena laughed nervously. Between what? Miss Callista looked her dead in the eyes. Between us and what awaits for us. That afternoon, Lena walked alone through the market district. Every other shop sold talismans or charms made of bones and shells. At one stall, an old man selling candles whispered, "You've got a shimmer on you. The dead love that smell." She hurried away. At dusk, she followed a dirt trail that led toward the marsh. Her aunt's directions were simple. Go where the air feels heaviest. By the time the sun dipped, Lena reached a shack by the water. A dozen crow feathers hung from its porch like wind chimes. And sitting in the rocking chair was her, Granny Alara. Her hair was white as driftwood, her eyes clouded over, but her smile was too knowing. Been waiting on you, Miss Lena, Alara croaked. You brought the road's attention, didn't you? I didn't mean to, Lena stammered. I just wanted to stop. I see things that aren't there. Oh, they're there, Alara said, rocking slowly. You just weren't supposed to see them yet. Inside the shack, candles burned low and thick. Their wax pooled into strange spiraling shapes. The walls were covered in sigils painted in ash and blood. The smell of earth, freshly turned earth, filled the air. Alara poured tea into 2 chipped cups. The liquid was black and still. You're what we call a seer-born off-path, she said. The dead whisper to all of us, but only some hear the words. You listen too well. I don't want to listen, Lena whispered. I want it gone. Ugh, the old woman chuckled. A sound like wood snapping in a fire. You can't give back what the marsh gave you, child. But you can trade it. Lena froze. Trade it? For what? Alara leaned forward, her blind eyes gleaming with something that wasn't blindness at all. For something stronger. The crossroads don't take nothing without giving back, but they don't give free neither. The candlelight flickered, and for a moment, Lena saw the old woman's shadow move on its own, stretching across the wall like a black serpent. Alara continued. You want silence? You want peace? Then you meet me at the crossroads when the moon's halfway down. Bring a bit of your blood, a silver coin, and something you can't live without. Lena's voice trembled. And then? Alara smiled. Then we'll make a deal. That night, the marsh was silent. No frogs, no wind. Only the slow creak of the house as Lena sat awake, clutching her grandmother's old pendant, the one she'd never taken off since childhood. It was the only thing that made her feel grounded, real. Her aunt had gone to bed hours ago. Midnight was close. The whispers began again, soft, familiar, inviting. The road's waiting. She stood, heart hammering, and stepped outside barefoot. The air smelled of wet metal and salt. Down the dirt path, the crossroads gleamed faintly under the moonlight. Something about the symmetry of the place, the way the 4 paths met perfectly in the middle, felt unnatural. Like geometry not meant for human eyes. Alara was already there, standing in the center with a lantern that didn't cast light. Its glow was black, swallowing everything it touched. You brought what I asked for? Lena nodded, trembling. She held out the coin, the pendant, and the knife she'd used to prick her finger. Blood dripped into the dust. Alara drew a circle around them, muttering words in a language that wasn't any human tongue. The ground vibrated. The shadows stretched outward. And then, from beneath the road, something answered. A voice that didn't belong to any single mouth, or species. It came from every direction, layered like 1,000 whispers in unison. Another offering, another wish. Alara tilted her head toward Lena. Tell it what you want, child. Lena swallowed hard. I want it to stop. I don't want to see the dead anymore. The ground pulsed once, like a heartbeat. Then you shall see all that is living and all that pretends to be. Lena's breath caught. What does that mean? Alara smiled faintly. Balance, sweetheart. You asked to close one eye, so the other must open wider. The earth split. A gust of cold wind blew upward, carrying the scent of rot and lilies. The black lantern flared, and every shadow around them seemed to lean closer. Then everything went dark. When Lena opened her eyes, she was back in her aunt's living room. The morning sun was pouring through the windows. It was over, except when she looked outside. The street wasn't empty. There were dozens of people standing there. Men, women, children, some dressed in old clothes, some missing limbs, others pale and translucent like mist. They weren't walking. They were waiting, watching her. And when one of them smiled, she saw that its teeth were made of river stones. The night pressed close to the cabin, heavy, breathing dark. Outside, the marsh shimmered faintly beneath a bruised moon. Its reflection fractured across the stagnant water. The air smelled of damp wood, old salt, and something faintly metallic, as if the earth itself had bled recently. Elias sat by the open window, staring into the nothing beyond. His hands trembled on his knees, not from age, but from the sound that wouldn't leave him alone. The slow rhythm beneath the floorboards. Not footsteps, breaths. The land was breathing again. He thought of Mara's words from that morning, the first she'd spoken since the burial. If the soil remembers, she'd whispered, then we must remind it what to forget. Now her voice seemed to echo through the room, even though she slept or pretended to in the corner. The candle between them burned low, wax puddling like melted bone. Shadows on the walls swayed like figures arguing in silence. When the sound came again, it was softer, like a hand brushing the underside of the planks. Elias stood. The floor gave slightly beneath his feet, as though something living flexed just below. He crouched, pressing his ear to the boards. The whisper rose up to meet him. Elias. He froze. The syllables were wet, heavy with soil. The voice was neither man nor woman. It was the ground itself speaking through 1,000 grains of damp earth. He wanted to run. Instead, he whispered back, because some instinct older than fear told him that running would make the voice follow. What do you want? A pause. Then, balance. The word shuddered through the timber. Every nail in the house seemed to vibrate with it. Elias swallowed. You already took what was owed. The candle hissed. The flame curved sideways as though blown by a breath from beneath the floor. Debt, the voice said, renews with every birth. He looked at Mara. Even in sleep, her body tensed, as if she too heard. They had made a bargain once, or rather his grandfather had. The land was fertile, the flood ceased, and their family never went hungry again. But the blessing came with a rhythm. Every generation, one child must return to the soil. A sacrifice, unspoken yet binding. Balance must be paid to keep the fields alive. Elias had buried his son Jonah 3 nights ago. The ground had accepted him. Or so he thought. At dawn, the marsh turned silver. Mara stood by the window, her hair hanging like dark moss, her face hollowed out by sleeplessness. He's not gone, she said quietly. Her hands were clutching something, the small wooden horse Jonah used to hold. It was streaked with dried mud. Elias didn't answer. He was staring at the window pane, where condensation traced words that no human hand could have written. He waits below. The letters faded as the light grew. By noon, the neighbors came. They brought bread, silence, and their own haunted eyes. No one mentioned the soil or the sound or the whispers that had crept back into the marsh at night. But Elias saw the way they looked at his house, the way they skirted its edges like it had teeth. After they left, he found a small pile of black stones by the door. 7 of them, arranged in a circle. Mara's voice trembled. They're marking us. Elias knelt beside the stones, touching one with his thumb. It was cold, colder than the air. No, he murmured. They're reminding us. Of what? That the debt doesn't end when you pay it. That night, the sound returned. Louder, hungrier. He tore up one of the floorboards with his bare hands. The soil beneath was wet, breathing in slow, shallow heaves. And in the center of the damp earth, something pale glistened. A child's fingerbone. He staggered back. Mara screamed, covering her mouth. Then the voice spoke again. Clear now. Close to his ear. Return the rest. Elias dropped the board. No, he whispered. You've taken enough. The room pulsed, the walls expanding as if inhaling. Balance. The word thundered through his skull. He stumbled toward the door, but it slammed shut before he could reach it. The candle burst, plunging the room into dark, breathing silence. When he woke, dawn had not come. Mara was gone. He found her in the field barefoot, her dress soaked to the knees, her hands sunk wrist deep into the soil. She was humming, a lullaby Jonah used to love. Mara! He ran to her, grabbing her arms. Her eyes rolled open slowly. They were not her eyes anymore. They were mud, dark, filled with small reflections of roots and worms. He wants to come home, she said. Then she smiled, and for a moment, he saw his son's smile flicker through her face. He shook her shoulders. Stop it, Mara, you can't balance. She whispered again, softer, almost lovingly. The earth around her feet shifted, swallowing her ankles. She didn't struggle, she looked peaceful. Elias fell to his knees, clawing at the dirt. But the more he dug, the deeper she sank, the ground folding over her like water closing around a stone. He stayed there until morning, fingers torn and bleeding. The marsh was still again. No breathing beneath the house, no whispers, only silence. For the first time in years, the fields glowed golden with dawn. The crows flew low but didn't scream. Elias walked back to the cabin. It felt lighter, quieter, peaceful. The kind of peace that comes after a wound stops bleeding. Not because it healed, but because there's nothing left to bleed. He stood by the window, staring at the place where Mara had vanished. Then he heard it faint, beneath the floor. Not the soil this time. Not a whisper. A child's laugh. Bright, gentle, familiar. Yona. Elias sank to the floor, tears cutting lines through the dirt on his face. He should have felt relief. But deep down, he knew the laugh didn't come from above. It came from below. He understood. Finally, the soil never gives back what it takes. It only borrows new names for the same hunger. He whispered to the silence, voice cracking. Then take me. Nothing answered. The air stood still. The marsh didn't breathe. He waited until night. Then he lay down where the floorboard had been torn open, pressing his cheek to the cool earth. And the earth sighed. The mud rose gently, wrapping his hands, his throat, his chest not violently, but tenderly, like a mother reclaiming her child. The last thing Elias felt was the heartbeat of the ground, slow and endless, sinking with his own until they became one rhythm, one balance. Morning broke not with sunlight, but with the color of ash. The marsh was wrapped in a fog so dense it swallowed sound. Even the birds had fallen silent. Only the faint rhythm of water dripping from the eaves reminded Elias he was still alive. He rose slowly from the floor, his body stiff, his skin streaked with dried mud, where he had slept beside the open earth. His first thought was of Mara, or whatever had become of her. The second was the laugh, the child's laugh that had haunted him through the night. He stumbled toward the window. The fog pressed against the glass like breath. He couldn't see the fields anymore, only the faint outlines of shapes moving beneath the mist, bending and straightening like figures at prayer. The land was changing. It was remembering. He tried to leave the house that morning, but something was wrong with the door. The hinges had bloomed overnight with white fungus, soft and fleshy like growths on a corpse. When he pushed against it, it groaned, and a thin line of brown water dripped down from the frame. He forced it open, Outside, the air smelled of rot, the sweet, heavy rot of old flowers and wet wood. And everywhere, bones, small bones, tiny enough to be birds, or something worse. They lay scattered across the path like pale seeds. Some were arranged in spirals, others in perfect circles, their centers marked with bits of twine or teeth. He knelt, picking one up. It was smooth, polished, almost, and carved. Etched into the surface was a single word, so small he had to squint to read it. Remember. Elias dropped it. It didn't fall, it sank, vanishing into the soil as if the ground had been waiting for it. He whispered, "Jonah?" But the marsh gave no answer. By noon, the fog had thinned, revealing what the night had done. The graves behind the house, the ones of his ancestors, his father, his grandfather, were no longer graves. The mounds were open, caved in like mouths that had whispered too long. Elias stood among them, heart pounding. The soil was undisturbed, yet something was missing. Not the bodies, they were still there, or at least their outlines were. What was gone were the bones. Every skeleton had been stripped clean, dismantled, carried away by something that moved without sound. He sank to his knees, hands trembling. He had buried them himself. He had spoken their names. He had honored the balance. So why now? A faint sound answered him. A ticking, like a clock buried underground. Then a whisper, deep and measured. The bones remember what the flesh forgets. He turned, scanning the marsh, but there was no one. The sound came from beneath his feet. They have carried their stories to the root, the voice continued. The harvest was not enough. Enough for what? Elias whispered, to keep the silence still. He went back to the cabin and sat at the table. His hands were shaking too hard to light the candle. When he finally did, the flame burned green for an instant before settling to gold. And that was when he saw the box. It lay in the center of the table, small, wooden, sealed with a strip of leather. He hadn't seen it before. Carved into the lid was the same word as on the bone. Remember. His breath caught. He touched it with one finger. The wood was cold, not the kind of cold that comes from air, but from time. He hesitated, then unlatched it. Inside were bones, tiny ones, arranged in order like a child's skeleton. But they were wrong. The ribs were too many. The skull was smooth, featureless, without sockets or teeth, and beneath him a folded scrap of parchment. He unfolded it with trembling hands. To the keeper of balance, the soil takes only what you hide. To forget is defeated. To remember is to suffer it. Choose. Elias stared at the words until the candle began to tremble. Then he looked back at the bones. They were rearranging themselves. Slowly, deliberately, the ribs shifted. The spine curled. The skull lifted. And then, the faintest sound, the rustle of air through something hollow. A voice rose from the bones, whispering like a secret, exhaled through dust. "Father." Elias fell back, knocking over the chair. "No," he gasped. "You're gone. You're at rest." "Not rest," the voice said. "Balance." The bones shivered. The candle flickered low. "She's waiting below." The world tilted. The room seemed to breathe in, then out. Elias clutched his head, feeling the hum of something vast beneath his skin. Not madness, but memory. He saw flashes, generations buried, bargains made, crops rising green from graves. He saw his grandfather's hands pressing coins into mud, his father whispering to the soil before every harvest. He saw Mara's eyes, dark with faith, sinking willingly into the earth. And he saw Jonah reaching out from beneath the floor, his small hand pale as salt, his voice echoing through the cracks. "It's your turn, Father." Elias ran. Through the fog, across the marsh, toward the oldest part of the land where the earth was black and soft and smelled of iron. His breath came in shallow gasps, his boots sinking with every step. He reached the mound, the one that had always been avoided, even by the crows. There, something was waiting. A figure knelt beside the pit. Not Mara. Not a woman at all. It had her shape, her hair, her dress, but the skin was patterned like bark, and its eyes were hollow sockets filled with damp soil. It turned its head slowly as he approached. "Elias," it said in Mara's voice. "The land remembers your blood." He fell to his knees, panting. "What do you want from me?" "Not want," it said gently. "Need." It reached out a hand, roots winding through its fingers like veins. "You must speak the testament." "M." "What?" "The bone testament," it whispered. "The vow of the buried. The only way to seal what was opened." Elias stared, heart hammering. "What happens if I refuse?" The creature smiled. "Then we forget you, too." It handed him something. A bone small, white, perfectly clean. When he touched it, voices flooded his mind. Thousands of them. Crying, praying, calling his name. Every voice was someone he had buried. He dropped it, but it didn't fall. It hovered, spinning slowly in the air before pressing itself against his chest. The skin parted like wet paper. The bone slid inside. Elias screamed. The voices filled him, whispering, chanting, weaving their stories through his blood. We fed the land to feed the living. We sowed our dead to grow the next. We remembered so the soil would forget. He felt their pain, their devotion, their hunger for balance. He saw centuries of bargains of lives traded for crops, of peace bought with silence. And beneath it all, one truth repeated like a heartbeat: the soil remembers everything. When he opened his eyes, the fog had thinned. The creature was gone. Only the pit remained, and the sound of roots shifting beneath the earth. He looked down. The ground had split open into a spiral, leading deep below, glowing faintly with a dull, pulsing light. Elias stepped closer. He could hear the whispers again, not threatening now, but pleading. Finish it. He understood. The bone testament was not words. It was an act. He knelt at the edge, pressing his hands into the soil. The earth pulsed beneath him, warm as skin. He whispered, voice breaking, "Let memory rest." The ground trembled. The light dimmed. The whispers stilled. He pressed harder, sinking his arms into the warmth until his elbows disappeared. "Let the bones sleep," he said. "Let the debt end here." Then, silence. When Elias awoke, he was lying in the field. The sun had risen, real sunlight this time, gold and clean. The air smelled of rain and wheat. The house stood quiet. The marsh was still. No fog. No whispers. He rose, weak, but alive. For a moment he believed it was over, until he looked down. His hands were no longer hands. They were roots. Small, pale roots, threading out from his fingers into the ground, pulsing faintly with blood. And from beneath the soil, faint as breath, came a voice, balance restored. He did not scream. He simply sank to his knees, letting the earth cradle him. His voice was calm now, tired, but calm. "Then let me be your memory." The wind shifted, carrying the scent of the marsh. The grass around him bowed low. The soil shivered once, then stilled. When the neighbors came weeks later, they found the cabin empty, the door sealed with moss. In the field behind it, a single white tree had grown tall, bone pale, its roots gripping the earth like a hand. And if you pressed your ear to its bark on quiet nights, you could still hear the hum of a heartbeat. Not human, not earth, something between. The sound of balance kept. It began with rain, not the kind that cleanses, but the kind that returns, thick, slow, seeping through the fields like a memory too heavy to drown. By dusk, the town smelled of iron and mildew. The air pressed close, thick with the scent of old roots. Every step through the mud seemed to wake something sleeping beneath. In the far marsh, the white tree stood, tall, still, and watching. Children whispered that it glowed at night, Old men said it hummed when the wind passed through, but those who lived near it said nothing at all. They only listened because the soil had begun to whisper back. The first to hear it was Ruth Carson, who lived at the edge of the old Blackwood property. She was tending her chickens when the ground trembled a faint ripple, like a pulse moving through water. She froze. Then she heard it, a voice, low, beneath her feet. "We are not gone." She dropped her feed bucket. The hens scattered, screaming. That night, she dug into the wet earth behind her house. She found nothing, just roots, tangled and white, stretching far deeper than the shovel could go. When she pressed her hand to them, she felt a heartbeat. By the third day, the fields began to move. Small mounds rose and fell in the distance, breathing like sleeping animals. At night, the townsfolk said they heard knocking beneath their floors, and sometimes laughter. Not cruel, not joyous, just familiar, as if someone they had buried long ago was knocking to be let in. Sheriff Miller came with his lanterns and his disbelief. He stood at the marsh edge, looking at the white tree, Elias's tree, glowing faintly in the fog. He spat into the mud and muttered, "Old swamp tricks." Then the light in his lantern flickered. The wick hissed. The flame turned green, and from the dark beneath the roots came a whisper, "Balance is not peace." The lantern burst, coating him in burning oil. His scream echoed across the fields, and when the townsfolk found him the next morning, there was no body, only a hollow shape in the soil, perfectly molded to his outline. The preacher from St. Wilma's Church declared it blasphemy. He called the town together, urged them to dig up the white tree and burn it. They gathered with shovels and crosses, singing hymns through their teeth, though their voices shook with every verse. But the earth would not yield. Every strike of a shovel hit something that wasn't stone, something soft, that moved. One man pulled back his spade and found it wet with red. He wiped it against his pants. The red smeared like blood but smelled like copper and rain. The preacher raised his Bible, shouting, "The land is cursed. It remembers the sins of the dead." And the ground replied, "Then it remembers you." A crack split the soil open like a wound. The hymn faltered. From the fissure rose a gust of air, cold and old, carrying the faint sound of voices, names, prayers, regrets, all blending into one endless murmur. The crowd scattered. Only the preacher remained, gripping his book, shaking. He whispered one final verse, and the earth pulled him under. When morning came, only the cross remained, half buried in the mud. Across town, in the small cottage where Elias once lived, a woman sat awake by candlelight. Her name was Maeve Hallow. She had been the midwife once, before her hands grew too weak. She had delivered Elias's son years ago, Jonah, and buried him herself when the fever took him. Now, every night, she felt the house breathe. She whispered into the dark, "Elias, child, what did you bring back?" The flame trembled, and then a knock, slow, rhythmic, beneath the floorboards. She leaned close, heart racing. "Jonah?" The knock paused. Then 3 soft taps answered. Steady, deliberate, yes. Maeve pressed her palm to the wood. It was warm, beating. A tear slipped down her cheek. "I missed you." From beneath the boards came the faintest whisper, not Jonah's voice, but something older wearing his tone. "The soil misses nothing." Maeve pulled her hand back. Her candle sputtered and died. Outside, the marsh wind rose like a sigh. Days bled into weeks. Animals fled the lowlands. Wells filled with mud. Crops that had not been planted began to sprout overnight, pale shoots with roots like veins curling toward the surface. And the white tree kept growing. Its bark was smooth as bone, its branches dripping with translucent sap that shimmered like tears. Those who touched it heard things. Lullabies from long-buried mothers, prayers whispered by drowned men, and one name, repeated, again and again, Elias. He had become a story by then, a ghost told to frighten children, the caretaker who fed the land, the man who made the bargain. But one night, when the fog returned thick and heavy, Ruth Carson saw a figure standing beneath the white tree. It looked like a man tall, bent slightly, his clothes soaked through with mud. He raised his hand, and the branches bent toward him, like worshippers. Ruth held her breath, clutching her lantern. The figure turned. His face was made of earth, eyes hollow, mouth cracked, roots threading through the skin. But within those hollows burned a faint, golden light. And when he spoke, his voice was both everywhere and nowhere. The soil remembers. The debt was not mine alone. Then the light spread down his arms, across the ground, through the fields, into the houses. And everywhere it touched, the dead began to wake. They did not rise from graves. They bloomed, hands unfolded from roots. Faces surfaced through the mud, calm and dreamlike. The town filled with the scent of wet clay and rain. The dead were not angry. They were remembering walking among the living as shadows made of memory. Ruth saw her husband at the door, smiling softly. The preacher's wife saw her child sleeping beside her. Maeve saw Jonah sitting by the hearth, tracing circles in the dust. They said nothing. They only looked eyes deep, patient, knowing, and everywhere, a single phrase rippled through the night like a hymn: balance returns. By dawn, the town was silent. Only the wind moved, whispering through windows, carrying with it the sound of roots growing faster than they should. Fields had turned to bone-white grass. The church bell rang once, though no one was there to ring it. And in the heart of the marsh, Elias knelt at the base of the white tree, his body more root than man now, his hands fused with the earth. He spoke softly, as though to himself, "It's done. The debt is paid." But from the soil beneath him came the murmur of countless voices, layered, eternal. Not yet. Memory has no end. The branches above him shivered. From them hung thousands of small, white objects, bones polished smooth by the rain. Each one bore a name. Each one whispered. Elias looked up, eyes hollow. "Then what remains?" "You." He nodded once, slowly. "Then take me." The roots beneath him opened like arms. He sank without struggle, without sound, the earth closing over him like water. As he vanished, the white tree pulsed once, a heartbeat of light, then stillness. The rain stopped. The fog lifted. The fields fell quiet. Only the faint scent of wet earth lingered rich, alive, humming softly. The town would rebuild, they said. They would plant new seeds. But none noticed that the crops that grew afterward were pale and flawless, untouched by rot, unbothered by drought. They grew faster, taller, and their roots ran red when pulled from the soil. Months later, a child wandering near the marsh found a small wooden box buried at the base of the white tree. He brought it to his mother. When she opened it, she found a single bone, carved with words so fine they were almost invisible. She squinted, holding it to the light. The soil remembers. The living forget. The candle beside her flickered out. When she looked back at her son, he was staring out the window, eyes glazed, lips moving silently. "It's whispering again," he said. She dropped the bone, but it didn't hit the floor. It melted into the dirt, sinking deep, vanishing as if the ground had been waiting all along. That night, the white tree bloomed. Its flowers were small and bone pale, their petals shaped like hands, and if you listened close, you could hear them moving, as though clapping. Softly, in the dark, the marsh exhaled. The wind rose. The earth sighed in its sleep. And deep below, where Elias's voice had once prayed for silence, 1,000 others now spoke in unison. The soil remembers. The wind from the coast had turned violent, screaming through the marsh reeds like something ancient being dragged awake. Clouds spun above like a wound in the sky, bleeding gray light onto the flooded road. Lena walked barefoot, the mud sucking at her steps, and with every movement the world whispered. They called her name. They begged. They laughed, wept, and sang a song with no melody. When she reached the crossroads, the same one, where the air always felt wrong, where time folded like wet paper, Granny Alara was already waiting. The old woman sat in her rocking chair, creaking gently, surrounded by 1,000 glass jars glowing faintly from within. Inside each, something shivered souls, trapped and flickering like dying fireflies. Lena stopped, her voice a whisper. "You knew this would happen." Granny Alara didn't look up. Her voice rasped like reeds against wind. "I only opened the door. You were the one who stepped through." The ground beneath Lena's feet pulsed faintly, breathing. The night shimmered the air, the soil. Even her skin felt thin, stretched, like a veil between two worlds. "You said I'd have balance," Lena said, her voice trembling. "But I can't live like this. I hear them all. They won't stop." Alara turned her head slowly. Her eyes were milk white, glowing from within, reflecting the swarm of faces behind Lena. "Balance is not silence, child," she said. "Balance is when you understand. They are all within you." Lena dropped to her knees. The soil was soft, wet, smelling faintly of iron and decay. "I don't want this," she gasped. "I just wanted to be normal again." Granny Alara stood. Her long skirt dragged over the mud, and from beneath it, black roots slithered out, curling around Lena's legs like living ropes. "No one returns unchanged from the crossroads," Alara said. "You planted a seed, Lena. Now it's harvest time." The wind stopped. The silence thickened, heavy and trembling, like wax before it breaks. Then the jars began to hum. Each one pulsed brighter, faster until they burst, one after another, flooding the night with thousands of white embers. The light swirled around Lena, circling her body, etching glowing symbols into the ground. Each rune screamed in her mind, fragments of memory, echoes of the dead, the forgotten. She saw a man, hanging from a willow by the marsh, his eyes open, accusing, a child drowning, her mouth full of weeds, and herself standing before a mirror. But in the reflection stood Granny Alara, smiling. Every death, every whisper, every echo, now lived within her. "That," Granny Alara murmured, her voice carried on the wind, "is the harvest of echoes. When the soil remembers, it calls. When you listen, you pay. Each soul a promise. Each death, a heartbeat. You, Lena, you are their field." Lena's chest burned. Something beneath her ribs pulsed, not a heart, but a seed sprouting. When she pressed her hand to her skin, she felt it hundreds of heartbeats, layered, restless, alive. She understood. She was no longer a girl. She was a vessel, a breathing graveyard. The rain began, not water, but bone dust. Each flake hissed when it touched her skin, leaving faint traces of light. The earth below convulsed, and from the mud rose pale hands, skeletal and reaching, gently lifting her upright. "What do they want from me?" Lena whispered. Granny Alara's smile was slow, ancient, sorrowful. "They want nothing," she said. "They only want to be heard. And now, you are their voice." She raised her hand toward the sky. The air tore open, spiraling wind, and light forming a colossal doorway, neither alive nor dead, shimmering between realities. "This is the true crossroads," said Granny Alara. "Not where you met me, but where I meet them all." Lena stepped forward. The voices inside her quieted, harmonizing into something vast, a low, mournful choir of the departed. She placed her hand upon the light. It flowed through her fire and ice, pain and memory flooding her mind with the pulse of everything that ever lived and died here. For one suspended heartbeat, she heard it, the rhythm of the world itself, the soil, the sea, the ghosts, all breathing together. When she opened her eyes, dawn had arrived. The marsh was still. The air glowed soft gray. Granny Alara's house was gone, burned to ash. All around, small gray flowers had bloomed from the mud, faintly luminous, like sighs made visible. Lena walked among them. The wind carried faint laughter, the kind that made you unsure if it came from joy or grief. She didn't need to hear words anymore. She understood them all. In her palm, the seed glowed faintly, then sank into her skin. By dusk, the crossroads was empty again. Only the sound of the tide and a bone chime swaying in the wind remained. Granny Alara was gone, but her voice still lingered, not in the air, but in the earth, in the breath between waves. Every soul needs someone to listen. Every listener must pay the price. Yet sometimes, the price itself is life. Lena smiled faintly. She knelt, pressing her palm to the soil, whispering something the world had long forgotten. The ground shivered a deep, slow pulse. The earth inhaled and exhaled. She was part of it now. She was the field. She was the harvest. And in that eternal silence that followed, Lena became the crossroads itself. The night has gone quiet now. The wind carries only what it cannot keep, ash, breath, and memory. Maybe you think these stories are only that, but if you've ever woken to the sound of someone whispering your name in an empty room, you already know the truth. Every door we close leaves something on the other side, and some doors, once opened, never forget how to find us again. Until next time, keep your lights low, and if you find yourself at a crossroads, don't look for the road ahead. Listen for the one beneath your feet, because the earth remembers, and it never stops whispering back.